When a decorated war veteran's split-second decision at a quiet library saves a billionaire's grandson from kidnappers, he unknowingly steps into a shady conspiracy that will test everything he learned in combat and everything he values as a father. Welcome to a story of courage, betrayal, and unexpected family bonds. Stay with me until the very end to see how this incredible tale unfolds, and don't forget to comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Millbrook Public Library, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors, where children's laughter usually echoed during story time. But today, the children's section was quieter than usual, with only a handful of families scattered among the colorful reading nooks and toy-filled corners. Marcus Mack Ellis sat cross-legged on a small carpet, his 6-year-old daughter Zoe curled against his side, her tiny finger tracing the illustrations in a picture book about brave knights and magical kingdoms. At 34, Mac still carried himself with the rigid posture of his military days, though the sharp edges had softened somewhat in the 2 years since he'd traded his combat boots for the daily routine of single parenthood. "Daddy, do you think knights were really that brave?" Zoe asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she pointed to an illustration of an armored warrior facing down a fearsome dragon. Mac's weathered hand smoothed her dark curls so much like her mother's that sometimes it took his breath away. "I think brave people come in all shapes and sizes, sweetheart. Knights, soldiers, teachers, doctors, even little girls who stand up for what's right." Zoe giggled softly, but her attention was already drifting to the activity happening near the library's back entrance. A maintenance worker in dark coveralls was kneeling beside one of the reading tables, apparently fixing a wobbly leg. Nothing unusual about that, except something in Mac's peripheral vision triggered an alarm that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. The man's movements were wrong, too fluid, too aware of his surroundings. Mac had seen that kind of hypervigilance before in soldiers on patrol, in operatives, conducting surveillance, in predators hunting prey. "Stay right here, baby," Mac murmured to Zoe, gently extracting himself from their reading nest. "Daddy needs to check something." Zoe looked up with those impossibly blue eyes that mirrored her mother's. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Mac lied smoothly, the way he'd learned to do when deployment dates got extended or when nightmares woke him at 3 a.m. "Just keep reading about those brave knights." Mac rose to his feet with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to move silently through hostile territory. The maintenance worker was now standing near a small boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The child sat alone at a corner table, an expensive leather backpack beside him, and what looked like a private school uniform, suggesting wealth that didn't typically frequent the public library. The boy looked uncomfortable, shifting nervously as the fake maintenance worker leaned closer, pointing toward the back exit, with what appeared to be casual conversation. But Mac could see the child's body language, the way his small shoulders hunched, how his hands gripped the edge of the table, the quick glances toward the main part of the library, as if searching for help. Every instinct Mac had developed in combat zones screamed danger. "Hey there!" Mac called out, his voice carrying the friendly authority that had made him effective with both his soldiers and his daughter. "Everything all right over here?" The maintenance worker's head snapped up, and Mac caught a flash of something that definitely wasn't friendly helpfulness. Cold eyes, a momentary tightening around the mouth, the subtle shift in posture that spoke of someone caught off guard. "Just explaining to the young man here that we need to evacuate this section for a few minutes," the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent Mac couldn't quite place. "Chemical leak from the heating system. Safety protocols, you understand." Mac's eyes swept the area. No other maintenance personnel. No warning signs. No smell of chemicals or any other indication of a problem. The man's coveralls were clean, too clean, for someone who'd actually been working on building systems. Chemical leak. Mac stepped closer, positioning himself between the fake worker and the boy. That's strange. I don't see any other staff evacuating people. Shouldn't the whole library be notified? The boy looked up at Mac with wide, frightened eyes. He said my mom was waiting outside for me, the child whispered. But my mom isn't supposed to pick me up until 5:30. Mac's blood went cold. Every protective instinct he'd developed as both a soldier and a father roared to life. This wasn't maintenance work, this was an abduction in progress. What's your name, buddy? Mac asked the boy, never taking his eyes off the fake maintenance worker. Theodore, the child said quietly. But everyone calls me Theo. Well, Theo, why don't you come stand over here with me while this gentleman explains exactly which chemical is leaking and where? Mac's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath that anyone with experience would recognize as a warning. The maintenance worker's hand moved toward something concealed beneath his coveralls. Mac didn't wait to see what it was. Years of combat training kicked in with devastating efficiency. Mac lunged forward, his left hand clamping down on the man's wrist, while his right struck the pressure point just below the fake worker's ear. The would-be kidnapper crumpled, but not before Mac heard him speak rapidly into a concealed radio device. Code red package is compromised. Repeat package is compromised. Mac's mind raced. Package meant Theo, and if there was a code red, that meant there were others. Theo, listen to me very carefully, Mac said, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. I need you to go to the main desk and tell Mrs. Henderson, you know Mrs. Henderson, you're right, tell her to call 911 right now. Can you do that? The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Good. Tell her that Mr. Mac said there's an emergency and she needs to lock down the building. Go quickly, but don't run. Walking fast, okay? As Theo hurried toward the main desk, Mac zip-tied the unconscious kidnapper with the plastic restraints he'd learned to always carry old habits from overseas. Deployments died hard. The man's radio crackled with urgent voices. Alpha Team, what's your status? Package is still in play, but we have complications. Abort and extract. Repeat, abort and extract. Mac grabbed the radio. Multiple teams, multiple escape routes. This wasn't some random crime of opportunity. This was a coordinated operation with serious resources behind it. Zoe. Mac called out, his parental panic finally breaking through his tactical focus. His daughter appeared from behind the reading corner, her book still clutched in her small hands. Daddy, why is that man sleeping on the floor? He's not feeling well, sweetheart. We need to get you somewhere safe right now. Mac scooped Zoe into his arms, his mind calculating exit routes and potential threats. Through the large front windows, he could see a black SUV parked across the street, engine running, tinted windows, positioning that would allow quick access to multiple escape routes. The library's front entrance chimed as two more men in coveralls entered. Mac cursed under his breath. They were boxed in. Mrs. Henderson, Mac shouted toward the main desk. Lockdown now. The elderly librarian, bless her quick thinking, immediately hit the panic button that would seal the main entrances and alert police. But Mac knew it would take time for help to arrive, and these people had clearly planned for contingencies. Daddy, I'm scared, Zoe whispered against his neck. I know, baby. But remember what we practiced. When Daddy uses his soldier voice, what do? Listen and obey, no questions, Zoe recited, though her voice trembled. That's my brave girl. Mac carried Zoe toward the back of the library, away from the new arrivals, who were now arguing with Mrs. Henderson at the front desk. They needed a defensible position with multiple exit options. The old library had been built in the 1920s, with thick walls and numerous alcoves that could provide cover. "Theo," Mac called softly as they passed the children's section. The boy emerged from behind the circulation desk where Mrs. Henderson had hidden him. His face was streaked with tears, but he was trying to be brave. "Come with us, buddy. We're going to play a game called Stay Safe until the police get here." Mac led both children to the library's local history section, a rarely used area in the back corner with heavy wooden shelves that could serve as both concealment and cover. The space had two exits, one leading to the main library and another that opened into the building's old fallout shelter, a relic from the Cold War that the library still used for storage. "Okay, team," Max said, setting Zoe down and kneeling to both children's level. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to play hide and seek with some people who aren't very nice. Theo, you're going to hold Zoe's hand and stay right behind me. If I tell you to run, you both go through that door." He pointed to the fallout shelter entrance. "And you keep going until you find the way out. Don't stop, don't look back. Just run until you find a police officer or someone you trust." "What about you, Daddy?" Zoe asked. Mac's heart clenched. "Daddy's going to make sure those not nice people can't follow you. But I'll be right behind you, I promise." It was a promise he hoped he could keep. The sounds from the main library were growing more urgent. Raised voices, the scraping of furniture being moved, Mrs. Henderson's protests growing fainter, as she was likely being restrained or moved. Mac checked his phone, no signal. They were jamming communications, another sign of serious operational planning. "Mr. Mac," Theo's voice was barely audible. "Those men, they knew my name. They knew about my mom's schedule. How did they know that—" Mac felt ice form in his chest. This wasn't a random kidnapping. Someone with inside information about this child's life had orchestrated this operation. Someone who knew Theodore would be at the library today alone at exactly this time. "Theo, I need you to think very carefully. Who knows your schedule? Who knows you come to the library on Thursday afternoons?" The boy's face scrunched up in concentration. "My mom, my Nana, Mr. Jensen. He's my bodyguard, but he's sick today. Mrs. Parker, who drives me sometimes. And—" his eyes widened. "And Mr. Pierce. He's the one who told Mom that Mr. Jensen should stay home today because he had that flu thing." Mac's tactical mind processed this information quickly. Inside job. Someone named Pierce had specifically arranged for the boy's regular protection to be absent today. This wasn't just kidnapping, this was betrayal from within the child's own circle. Heavy footsteps echoed through the library. Multiple sets moving with purpose rather than the casual gait of people browsing books. They were conducting a systematic search. "Zoe, Theo," Mac whispered. "Remember the game we're playing. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay quiet until I say it's safe, or until I tell you to run. Understand?" Both children nodded, their small faces grave with an understanding that children should never have to possess. Mac moved to the edge of the history section, peering through the gaps in the shelves. 3 men, all in maintenance coveralls, all carrying equipment that definitely wasn't for fixing library heating systems. Professional gear, communications equipment, and at least one was carrying what looked like a tranquilizer gun meant to subdue, not kill. They wanted Theodore alive and unharmed. That gave Mac a tactical advantage. They couldn't risk collateral damage or excessive noise that might attract attention from outside. But it also meant they were professionals who would adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "Theodore Whitfield," one of the men called out. "We know you're here, son. Your grandmother sent us to bring you home safely. There's been a security threat at your house and we need to get you somewhere secure." Mac's eyebrows rose. Whitfield. Even in a small town like Millbrook, everyone knew that name. Eleanor Whitfield, the transportation magnate whose company had built half the railways in the northeastern United States. Her late daughter had been married to some European businessman who died in a plane crash years ago, leaving behind a young son. Theodore Whitfield wasn't just any child, he was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. "I know you're scared," the man continued, his voice taking on a false warmth that made Mac's skin crawl. "But we're here to help. Mr. Pierce sent us personally. You remember Mr. Pierce, don't you? He works with your grandmother." Theo pressed closer to Mac, his small body trembling. "That's the man I told you about," he whispered. "But something's wrong. Nana always sends Mr. Jensen, and she always calls me first to tell me what's happening." Smart kid. Mac was impressed by the boy's presence of mind, despite his obvious terror. The footsteps were getting closer. Mac made a decision that every parent would understand, and every soldier would recognize sometimes you have to take the fight to the enemy to protect the innocent. "Stay here," he breathed to the children. "If shooting starts, you run. Don't wait for me, just run." Mac slipped between the shelves like a ghost, using skills he'd hoped never to need again in civilian life. The first kidnapper was methodically checking each aisle, his attention focused on ground level, where a child might be hiding. He never saw Mac coming. A sleeper hold applied correctly renders someone unconscious in seconds without permanent damage. The man dropped silently, his radio clattering to the floor. Mac grabbed it, and the tranquilizer gun checking the device's remaining ammunition, 6 darts loaded with enough sedative to drop an adult, let alone a child. "Baker, report," came a voice through the radio. Mac keyed the mic, pitching his voice low and gravelly. "Clear in Section 3, moving to 4. "Copy. Alpha team is in position outside. We have visual on local law enforcement approaching. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Mac could work with 3 minutes. The second kidnapper was more cautious, moving with the practiced awareness of someone who'd done this before. Mac shadowed him through the stacks, waiting for the right moment. When the man bent to check beneath a reading table, Mac struck again. 2 down, 1 to go. The third man was smarter than his partners. When they failed to report in, he didn't call out or continue the search. Instead, he moved toward the back of the library, with purposeful steps, his own radio crackling with updates from the team outside. "Police are setting up a perimeter. We need that package now, or we abort." Mac found himself in a game of lethal hide-and-seek with a professional who clearly had military or law enforcement training. The man moved too well, anticipated too much, positioned himself too smartly for this to be his first operation. But Mac had advantages the kidnapper didn't know about. He knew this library better than they did, had spent countless hours here with Zoe over the past 2 years. He knew which floorboards creaked, which aisles offered the best sightlines, and which sections would muffle sound. More importantly, he was fighting for his daughter and an innocent child while they were fighting for money. The difference in motivation made all the tactical difference in the world. Mac used that knowledge, now guiding the kidnapper away from the children's hiding spot and into the library's central atrium, where the old building's acoustics would work against concealment. When the man finally revealed himself, checking the main circulation desk area, Mac was ready. The tranquilizer dart caught him in the neck before he could raise his own weapon. 3 down. Mac keyed the radio. "Package secured. Moving to extraction point Alpha." "Negative," came the immediate response. "Package comes to us or Alpha team moves in hard." Through the library's front windows, Mac could see the black SUV still idling across the street, and now he could make out at least 2 more figures moving in the shadows of the surrounding buildings. The radio chatter suggested they had overwatch positions and were prepared for a prolonged standoff. But they hadn't counted on local law enforcement responding as quickly as they had. Mac could hear sirens now growing closer. And from the increasingly urgent tone of the radio traffic, the kidnappers were running out of time and options. All teams prepare for abort sequence. Cleanup protocol is now in effect. Mac's blood ran cold. Cleanup protocol in operations like this usually meant eliminating witnesses and evidence. They were about to turn this from kidnapping to multiple homicide. "Zoe, Theo," Mac called out. "We're leaving right now." He sprinted back to the history section where both children waited with wide, frightened eyes. Zoe launched herself into his arms while Theo grabbed his hand with desperate strength. "The fallout shelter now," Mac ordered, leading them through the concealed door that most library patrons never noticed. The underground space was musty and filled with old furniture and document storage, but it connected to a tunnel system that had been built during the Cold War to connect several downtown buildings. Mac had explored these tunnels with Zoe during one of their library adventures, never imagining he'd need that knowledge to save their lives. Behind them, Mac could hear the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades detonating in the main library. The kidnapping team was covering their retreat with devices designed to disorient anyone in pursuit. Mrs. Henderson Mac prayed the elderly librarian had found adequate cover. "This way," Mac whispered, leading the children through the dimly lit tunnel system, toward an exit he remembered in the basement of the old courthouse 2 blocks away. As they moved through the underground passages, Theo spoke up in a small, scared voice. "Mr. Mac, why did those men want to take me?" Mac considered his answer carefully. The boy deserved honesty, but he was also 7 years old and traumatized. Sometimes, Theo, people think they can get money or power by hurting other people. But they're wrong. And that's why there are people like police officers and soldiers and even librarians like Mrs. Henderson who stand up to protect kids like you and Zoe. "Are you a soldier?" Theo asked. "I used to be. Now I'm just a dad who believes in protecting children." They reached the courthouse basement exit, just as Mac's phone regained signal and immediately began buzzing with missed calls and text messages. The first call was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Ellis?" The voice was elderly, refined, and crackling with barely controlled emotion. "This is Eleanor Whitfield. I understand you have my grandson." Mac stopped walking. "Mrs. Whitfield, your grandson is safe. But we need to talk. The people who tried to take him, they had inside information about his schedule, his protection detail. Someone close to your family set this up." There was a long pause. When Eleanor Whitfield spoke again, her voice carried the steel of someone who had built a business empire from nothing. "Mr. Ellis, I want you and Theodore and your daughter to come to Whitfield Point immediately. I'm sending secure transportation. We have much to discuss, and I suspect Theodore is still in danger." Mac looked down at both children, their faces turned up to him with absolute trust. Zoe, his world, his responsibility, and Theo, a boy who had somehow become his responsibility too in the space of an hour. Outside, sirens wailed as law enforcement responded to what would undoubtedly become a major investigation. But Mac knew that investigations took time, and the people who had orchestrated today's attempted kidnapping had resources that could buy them plenty of opportunities to try again. "Mrs. Whitfield," Mac said, finally, "we'll come. But I want to understand exactly what we're walking into." "So do I, Mr. Ellis. So do I." 20 minutes later, a convoy of black sedans with tinted windows pulled up to the courthouse's rear entrance. Professional security personnel in suits rather than fake coveralls stepped out, and Mac recognized the bearing of actual law enforcement or military contractors. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with alert eyes and the confident bearing of someone used to command, approached Mac with credentials already extended. Mr. Ellis, I'm Anna Delgado, head of security for the Whitfield organization. Mrs. Whitfield sends her gratitude and asks that you accompany us to Whitfield Point for debriefing and protection until we can assess the full scope of the threat against Theodore. Max studied the credentials carefully. Former Secret Service, according to the background summary. Multiple commendations, spotless record. If Eleanor Whitfield had people like Anna Delgado working for her, then she took security seriously. What about the library, Mrs. Henderson? Mrs. Henderson is safe and being treated for minor smoke inhalation. The library is secure and local law enforcement is processing the scene. We'll need your statement, but Mrs. Whitfield believes it would be safer to take that statement at Whitfield Point. Mac looked down at Zoe, who was studying the security agents, with the serious attention she gave to everything new in her world. What do you think, sweetheart? Should we go meet Theo's grandmother? Zoe considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old being asked to make an important decision. Is she nice like Theo? I think she must be, Max said. After all, she raised such a brave, smart boy. Theo beamed at the compliment, some of his fear finally beginning to fade. As they were escorted to the waiting vehicles, Mac caught Anna Delgado's eye. Ms. Delgado, the men who did this, they mentioned someone named Pierce, someone who apparently has access to Theodore's schedule and security arrangements. Anna's expression went carefully neutral. We're aware of Mr. Pierce. He'll be part of our discussion at Whitfield Point. But Mac caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her hand moved unconsciously toward her concealed weapon. Ana Delgado knew more than she was saying, and whatever she knew was making her very, very worried. As the convoy pulled away from downtown Millbrook, heading toward the Whitfield estate in the hills overlooking the Hudson River, Mac found himself wondering what exactly he was getting himself and Zoe into. But looking at Theo, who was finally starting to relax, as he chatted quietly with Zoe about knights and dragons and brave people who protected others, Mac knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes Mac reflected, the most important battles were the ones you never expected to fight. And sometimes the most important victories were measured not in tactical objectives accomplished, but in the trust of children who believed you would keep them safe. The convoy turned through gates that spoke of wealth beyond Mac's experience, heading toward a mansion that looked like something from a movie about American industrial dynasties. But Mac's attention was focused on the 2 children beside him and on the growing certainty that their adventure was just beginning. Whatever came next, he would face it the same way he'd faced everything since Sarah died, with absolute determination to protect his daughter and honor the values that made life worth living. Even if those values sometimes led a man into situations that would test every skill he'd ever learned and every principle he'd ever held dear. The wrought iron gates of Whitfield Point opened with silent precision, revealing a winding drive that cut through manicured grounds where ancient oak trees stood sentinel over rolling lawns that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the Hudson River. Mac had seen wealth before. Military contractors lived well, and some of his fellow veterans had landed lucrative private security jobs, but this was something else entirely. This was the kind of generational wealth that built universities and named hospital wings. Zoe pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she whispered, "Daddy, is this a castle?" "Something like that, sweetheart," Mac murmured, though his attention was focused on the security measures he was cataloging almost unconsciously. Discrete camera positions, natural choke points where the drive curved around landscaped hills, sight lines that would allow overwatch positions to cover every approach. Whoever had designed the grounds understood defensive tactics as well as aesthetics. Theo had grown quiet as they approached the mansion, his small face pressed against his own window. "Nana's going to be so worried," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a child who understood that his actions affected other people. She doesn't like it when I'm late, and she really doesn't like it when scary things happen. Ana Delgado's voice carried from the front passenger seat, warm but professional. Your grandmother has been worried, Theodore, but she's also incredibly proud of how brave you've been today, and she's very grateful to Mr. Ellis for keeping you safe. The mansion itself rose from the landscape like something from the Gilded Age, all limestone facades and copper roofing that had turned green with time. Broad steps led to a columned entrance where Mac could see figures waiting, staff members, he assumed, though their posture suggested they might serve multiple functions beyond traditional household duties. As their vehicle came to a stop, Mac found himself taking inventory of potential threats and escape routes, habits that Sarah used to tease him about, but that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. The difference was that now he was responsible not just for his own life, but for Zoe's, and somehow for Theo's as well. Stay close to me, he told both children as Ana Delgado opened their door. Remember, we're guests here, so best behavior. Like when we visit Grandma Kate? Zoe asked, straightening her little shoulders in the way that always made Mac's heart swell with pride. Exactly like that baby. The front doors opened before they reached them, revealing an elderly woman who carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but whose eyes held nothing but relief and love as they fixed on Theo. Eleanor Whitfield was smaller than Mac had expected, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and clothing that spoke of understated luxury. But there was steel in her spine and intelligence in her gaze that reminded Mac of the toughest officers he'd served under. Theodore, she said, her voice catching slightly as the boy broke away from Mac's side and ran into her arms. My dear boy, are you all right? Are you hurt? I'm okay, Nana, Theo said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Mr. Mac saved me, and Zoe helped too. She's really brave. Eleanor's eyes found Mac's over Theo's head, and Mac saw a depth of gratitude there that made him uncomfortable. He'd done what any decent person would do, protect a child. The thanks he saw in her expression suggested she understood just how close they'd come to losing the boy. Mr. Ellis, she said, extending a hand that was surprisingly firm despite her age, I cannot adequately express my gratitude for what you did today. You risked your own life and your daughter's safety to protect Theodore. That is not something I will ever forget. Anyone would have done the same thing, Mac said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Most people would have called 911 and hoped for the best. I'm just glad everyone's safe. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Zoe, who was staying close to Mac's side but studying the mansion with wide eyes. And you must be Zoe. Theodore has been telling me how brave and smart you are. Zoe offered a small smile and a polite nod, the manners Mac had worked hard to teach her, despite their sometimes chaotic circumstances. Thank you for inviting us to your castle, Mrs. Whitfield. It's very pretty. Eleanor's smile transformed her entire face, and Mac caught a glimpse of the woman who had probably been a formidable beauty in her youth. Would you like to see some of the pretty parts while the adults talk about some boring grown-up things? A woman appeared at Eleanor's shoulder. Hispanic, maybe 40, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone used to managing both children and household crises. This is Maria, Eleanor continued. She helped raise Theodore's mother, and now she helps take care of Theodore when he visits. She makes the most amazing chocolate chip cookies in the world. Zoe's eyes lit up. She had inherited her mother's sweet tooth, but she looked to Mac for permission before responding. The small gesture of checking with him first made Mac's chest tight with pride and love. It's okay, sweetheart. Stay with Maria and Theo, and I'll come find you in a little while. As the children were led deeper into the mansion, chattering about cookies and castles, Eleanor gestured for Mac to follow her in a different direction. Ana Delgado fell into step behind them, and Mac noticed that other figures, security personnel, clearly had taken position that would allow them to monitor all approaches to whatever room they were heading toward. Eleanor led them through a series of hallways lined with oil paintings and antique furniture that Mac suspected was worth more than he'd make in several lifetimes, finally arriving at what appeared to be a study or library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany, and tall windows that offered commanding views of the Hudson River Valley. "Please sit," Eleanor said, settling behind the desk, with the ease of someone who had conducted important business from that chair for decades. "Anna, would you brief Mr. Ellis on what we know so far?" Anna Delgado took a seat across from Mac, her expression grave. "The 3 men you neutralized at the library have been identified. Professional contractors, likely ex-military with connections to several organizations that specialize in corporate espionage and specialized extraction services." "Extraction services," Mac repeated. "That's a polite way of saying kidnapping." "Among other things, yes. They were well-funded, well-informed, and well-equipped. This wasn't an opportunistic crime, it was a carefully planned operation with significant resources behind it." Eleanor leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk surface. "Mr. Ellis, I need you to understand something about our family's situation. Whitfield Industries is more than just a transportation company. We hold contracts with the Department of Defense, we're involved in infrastructure projects that affect national security, and we have business relationships that extend far beyond American borders." Mac was beginning to get a clearer picture of what he'd stumbled into. "You're saying Theo wasn't targeted for ransom money?" "Oh, money was certainly part of it," Anna interjected. "But more likely Theodore was being taken to be used as leverage against Mrs. Whitfield, against the company, against decisions that affect billions of dollars in government contracts. And you believe someone with inside access to your family provided the information that made today's operation possible." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Pierce Langley. He's been our chief financial officer for 8 years, and he has access to family schedules, security protocols, and financial information that would make Theodore an incredibly valuable target." Max studied both women's faces. "But you're not certain it was him?" "We're certain someone close to the family provided inside information," Anna said. "Pierce is the most obvious suspect, but we have to consider other possibilities. Household staff, security personnel, even family friends who might have access to Theodore's schedule." Eleanor stood and moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the afternoon light. "Mr. Ellis, I have a proposition for you. Theodore clearly trusts you, and your military background makes you uniquely qualified for what I'm about to suggest. I want to hire you as Theodore's personal protection specialist while we investigate this situation and neutralize the threat." Mac felt his eyebrows rise. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm flattered, but I'm not a professional bodyguard. I'm a single dad trying to raise my daughter and figure out what comes next in my life." "Which is exactly why you're perfect for this job," Eleanor said, turning back to face him. "Theodore needs protection, yes, but he also needs normalcy. He needs someone who understands what it's like to be responsible for a child's safety and happiness. Someone who won't treat him like a package to be delivered, but like a little boy who deserves to feel secure and loved." Anna leaned forward in her chair. "The truth is, Mr. Ellis, we don't know who we can trust right now. Our regular security protocols have been compromised. But you've already proven that you'll put yourself at risk to protect Theodore, and you did it for no reason other than it was the right thing to do." Mac thought about his small apartment in downtown Millbrook, his part-time job at the hardware store that barely covered their expenses, the constant worry about Zoe's future, and his own ability to provide for her the way Sarah would have wanted. Then he looked around Eleanor Whitfield's study with its obvious wealth and equally obvious problems. What exactly would this job entail? Eleanor returned to her desk, pulling out a folder that she slid across to him. Live here at Whitfield Point with Zoe. Provide close personal protection for Theodore during his visits. He splits his time between here and his boarding school in Connecticut. Help Anna's team investigate the security breach and identify who's behind the threats. And most importantly, give Theodore the chance to be a normal little boy who happens to have someone watching over him who actually cares about his well-being. Mac opened the folder and nearly choked on the salary figure listed on the first page. It was more money than he'd made in any 3 years of his adult life, with benefits that included health insurance, housing, and educational provisions for Zoe that would set her up for life. This is too much, he said quietly. It's exactly what it's worth, Eleanor replied firmly. Theodore's life is priceless to me, Mr. Ellis. His safety and happiness are worth any amount I might pay. From somewhere deeper in the mansion came the sound of children's laughter. Zoe and Theo, probably covered in chocolate chip cookie crumbs, and getting along like they'd been friends for years instead of hours. The sound made Mac think about all the times Zoe had asked why they couldn't live in a house with a yard where she could have a dog, or why other kids got to go to summer camps while she spent her days at the hardware store with him. There's something else you should know, Anna said, her voice careful. The men who tried to take Theodore today, they weren't working alone. We have intelligence suggesting that this was the first of multiple planned operations. If today had succeeded, it would have been followed by additional actions against other members of the Whitfield family. You're saying this isn't over? We're saying this was just the beginning, Eleanor confirmed, which is why I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who's already proven that they'll fight for Theodore's safety. Mac closed the folder and looked out the window toward the Hudson River, where the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the water. In the distance, he could see boats moving up and down the river, commerce continuing, life going on, people pursuing their own dreams and facing their own challenges. If I do this, he said finally, I need to understand the rules. Zoe's safety comes first, always. If there's ever a situation where I have to choose between protecting her and protecting Theo, then you protect Zoe, Eleanor said immediately. Theodore would want that too. He's already told me how much he likes her and how brave she was today. And I need to know everything. No secrets about the threats you're facing, no information held back because you think I don't need to know it. If I'm going to keep that boy safe, I need to understand exactly what we're up against. Anna nodded. Agreed. Full transparency on all security matters. Max stood and walked to the window himself, looking out over grounds that could easily hide a dozen different threats. But they could also hide a dozen different defensive positions, and the mansion itself was built like a fortress disguised as a home. How long are we talking about this arrangement? Until we've identified and neutralized the threat, Eleanor said. Could be weeks, could be months. I hope it won't be longer than that. From the hallway outside came the sound of running feet and excited voices. The door burst open, and Zoe appeared, her face flushed with excitement and cookie crumbs on her cheek. Daddy, you have to see Theo's room. He has a castle bed and books about dragons and a window that looks out over the whole world. Behind her, Theo appeared with Maria, looking happier than he had since Mac first saw him at the library. Mr. Mac, can Zoe stay for dinner? Maria makes the best spaghetti, and she said she'd teach us how to make pasta shapes like flowers. Mac looked at his daughter's bright, excited face, more animated than he'd seen her in months. Then he looked at Theo, who was practically bouncing with the kind of energy that came from feeling safe and having a new friend to share adventures with. What do you think, Zoe? Would you like to stay for dinner? Can we, Daddy? Please, Theo said there's a library with more books than we could read in a whole year, and Maria said she'd show us the garden where they grow strawberries. Mac caught Eleanor's eye, and saw understanding pass between them. This wasn't just about a job or about money or even about security. This was about two children who had found friendship in the midst of danger, and about adults who had the power to give those children a chance at something better than they'd had before. "Mrs. Whitfield," Max said, formally extending his hand, "you have a deal, but I want it understood that if at any point I believe this situation is putting Zoe at risk, we're gone." "Understood," Eleanor replied, shaking his hand with a grip that reminded him she'd probably negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars from behind that desk. "Anna will brief you on our current security protocols and threat assessments. Maria will show you and Zoe to your quarters, and Pierce Langley will be joining us for dinner tonight." Mac's eyes sharpened. "You're bringing the prime suspect to dinner with the children." "I'm bringing a trusted employee to dinner with his employer," Eleanor corrected. "If Pierce is involved in this conspiracy, the best way to flush him out is to let him think his plan is still viable. If he's innocent, then we need his help to identify who is responsible." Anna stood, her expression grim. Either way, tonight should be very revealing. As they prepared to leave the study, Eleanor called Mac back. "One more thing, Mr. Ellis. Theodore has been through a terrible trauma today, but he's shown remarkable resilience. I suspect that has something to do with having met you and Zoe. Children have a way of rising to meet the expectations we set for them." "Theo's a good kid," Max said simply. "Smart, brave kind. He's going to be fine." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, but her voice carried undertones of worry that suggested she understood better than anyone how fragile a child's safety could be in a world where money and power created as many dangers as they solved. "Yes, I believe he will be." The quarters Anna led them to were larger than Mac's entire apartment, with a sitting area, 2 bedrooms, and windows that offered sweeping views of the Hudson River Valley. Zoe immediately claimed the smaller bedroom, delighting in the window seat that was perfect for reading, while Mac found himself in accommodations that were more luxurious than anywhere he'd stayed outside of military officer quarters overseas. "This is temporary," he told himself as he unpacked their few belongings. "Just until the threat is neutralized and we can go back to our normal life." But watching Zoe explore their new space with wonder and excitement, seeing how her face lit up at the prospect of friendship and adventure, Mac found himself wondering what normal really meant, and whether the life they'd been living in Millbrook was what was best for his daughter, or simply what he'd been able to provide. Evening came with a golden light that turned the Hudson River into a ribbon of molten metal, and Mac found himself dressing Zoe in her best dress, a simple blue thing that Sarah had bought for her before she died, for dinner with people whose casual clothes probably cost more than his monthly salary. "Do I look okay, Daddy?" Zoe asked, smoothing the dress with careful hands. "You look perfect, sweetheart. Like a princess who's also ready for adventure." Theo appeared at their door wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, his hair neatly combed but his eyes bright with excitement. "Nana said we're eating in the small dining room tonight because it's more friendly for children. And she said Mr. Pierce is coming so we can tell him about our adventure at the library." Mac felt every protective instinct he possessed go on high alert. "Theo, when we meet Mr. Pierce, I want you to stay close to me or to your grandmother, okay? Sometimes adults need to have grown-up conversations, and it's important for children to listen carefully." The boy's face grew serious with the kind of understanding that made Mac's heart ache. Children shouldn't have to learn to be suspicious of adults, but sometimes survival required uncomfortable lessons. Dinner was served in what Eleanor had called the small dining room, though it was still large enough to seat 20 people around a polished table that reflected the light from an antique chandelier. The food was excellent. Maria had indeed made pasta with flower-shaped noodles, much to the children's delight, but Mac found his attention focused on Pierce Langley, from the moment the man entered the room. Langley was perhaps 50, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of expensive tailoring and regular workouts. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and his manner with the children was appropriately avuncular. Everything about him suggested competence, trustworthiness, and genuine care for the Whitfield family's welfare, which made Mac's instincts scream danger. "Theodore," Pierce said, settling into his chair with practiced ease, "I heard you had quite an adventure today. I'm so sorry I wasn't available when the emergency call came in. I was in meetings in the city and couldn't be reached immediately." Theo nodded politely, but stayed close to Eleanor's side. "It was scary, but Mr. Mack kept us safe, and the police came really fast when Mrs. Henderson called them." "Mr. Mack," Pierce said, turning his attention to Mack with apparent interest. "I understand you're former military. Eleanor mentioned you showed remarkable tactical awareness in handling the situation." Mack kept his response neutral. "Basic training kicked in. Anyone with combat experience would have recognized the setup for what it was. Still, most civilians would have simply called for help and hoped for the best. Your decision to engage directly probably saved Theodore's life." There was something in the way Pierce emphasized certain words that made Mack think the man was fishing for information, trying to understand exactly what Mack had observed, what he might have learned about the kidnapping attempt. Eleanor cleared her throat delicately. "Pierce, I've asked Mr. Ellis to stay on as Theodore's personal security consultant while we review our protection protocols. Given today's events, I think it's clear we need to reassess our current arrangements." Pierce's expression didn't change, but Mack caught a slight tightening around the man's eyes. "Of course. Though I hope you don't think today's incident represents a failure on our part." The threat assessment for Theodore indicated minimal risk during routine activities like library visits. "No one is assigning blame," Eleanor said smoothly. "But clearly our threat assessment was inadequate. Theodore could have been killed or taken, and we need to understand how such detailed intelligence about his schedule and protection became available to hostile actors." Now Pierce looked genuinely concerned. "You think this was an inside job?" "I think we have to consider all possibilities," Anna Delgado interjected from her position near the dining room's entrance. Mack hadn't noticed her enter, but her presence suggested this conversation was being carefully monitored and recorded. Pierce nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll pull together all the relevant files, Theodore's schedules, security protocols, personnel with access to sensitive information. If someone in our organization is involved in this, we'll find them." Mack watched the interplay between the adults while keeping half his attention on Zoe and Theo, who were absorbed in Maria's story about the mansion's history and the secret passages that had been built during Prohibition. The children's easy friendship was a bright spot in what was clearly becoming a complex and dangerous situation. "Pierce," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives, "I want you to work directly with Anna and Mr. Ellis on this investigation. Full cooperation, complete transparency. If there are traitors in our organization, I want them identified and dealt with appropriately." "Absolutely," Pierce agreed. "Though I have to say the sophistication of today's operation suggests we might be dealing with external actors who have found ways to gather intelligence about our operations. Corporate espionage is a significant threat in our industry." Mack found himself studying Pierce's body language, his tone of voice, the way he positioned himself in relation to the others in the room. Everything about the man suggested sincerity and competence, but Mack had learned in Afghanistan that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who appeared most trustworthy. As dinner wound down and Maria prepared to take the children upstairs for baths and bedtime stories, Pierce made his excuses about early meetings and headed for the door. but he paused beside Mac's chair, leaning down as if to offer a private word. "Mr. Ellis, I want you to know that I think Eleanor made an excellent choice in hiring you. Theodore needs someone who understands that protection isn't just about tactical responses, it's about helping a child feel secure enough to be a child." Mac met Pierce's eyes directly. "That's exactly what I intend to do." "I'm sure you will. And if there's anything I can do to help with Theodore's security, or your transition to working with our organization, please don't hesitate to ask." After Pierce left, Eleanor and Anna remained in the dining room with Mac, while Maria took the children upstairs. The atmosphere immediately became more serious, more focused. "Initial impressions?" Anna asked. Mac considered his words carefully. "He's smooth, professional, said all the right things, which could mean he's innocent and genuinely concerned about Theo's safety, or it could mean he's very good at playing a role." Eleanor poured herself a glass of wine, her movements precise but thoughtful. "Pierce has been with us for 8 years. He's been involved in sensitive business decisions, he's had access to family information, and he's been trusted with Theodore's welfare on multiple occasions. All of which would make him either the perfect person to help protect Theo, or the perfect person to betray that trust," Mac observed. "Exactly," Anna said grimly, "which is why we need to move carefully. If Pierce is innocent, false accusations could destroy his career and damage his family. If he's guilty, tipping him off could put Theodore in even more danger." Mac thought about the children upstairs, probably splashing in oversized bathtubs and listening to Maria's stories about brave knights and clever princesses. Zoe had been so excited about their new adventure, so thrilled to have found a friend like Theo. The idea that her happiness might be built on a foundation of danger and deception made his chest tighten with familiar anxiety. "What's the plan for tomorrow?" Eleanor consulted a leather-bound planner. "Theodore has tutoring sessions in the morning. He's homeschooled when he's here rather than at his boarding school. I thought perhaps Zoe might join him for some of the lessons. Our tutor, Mrs. Chen, is excellent with children and always adapts her methods to different learning styles." Mac nodded. "Zoe would love that. She's been worried about missing school." "In the afternoon," Anna continued, "I want to walk the grounds with you, show you our security installations, and discuss threat assessment protocols. If you're going to be responsible for Theodore's safety, you need to understand how this property can be defended and what our contingency plans look like. And Pierce, we'll be here for a security meeting at 2 o'clock, Eleanor said. A chance for all of us to review what we know and plan our next steps." Max stood suddenly, feeling the weight of the day's events and the enormous responsibility he'd just accepted. "I should check on Zoe, make sure she's settling in okay." As he reached the dining room door, Eleanor called his name. "Mr. Ellis, thank you. Not just for today, but for giving Theodore something he's rarely had the chance to be a normal little boy with a friend his own age. Whatever comes next, you've already given him something precious." Mac climbed the grand staircase toward the children's voices, thinking about Eleanor's words and about the strange turns life could take. This morning, he'd been a single father struggling to make ends meet and worried about his daughter's future. Tonight, he was living in a mansion responsible for protecting a billionaire's grandson and trying to identify a traitor who might be planning additional attacks. But listening to Zoe's laughter echoing through the halls of Whitfield Point, seeing her joy at new friendship and new adventures, Mac found himself thinking that maybe some changes, even dangerous ones, were worth the risks they brought. The question was whether he could keep both children safe while navigating whatever conspiracy had targeted the Whitfield family, and whether the trust Eleanor had placed in him was justified, or simply the desperate hope of a grandmother who'd nearly lost the most important thing in her world. Time would tell, Mac reflected, as he headed toward the sound of children's voices and Maria's gentle laughter. Time would tell. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Whitfield Point carried a golden quality that made even the mansion's grand hallways feel warm and welcoming. Mac had been awake since dawn, old military habits died hard, and had spent the early hours walking the perimeter of the estate cataloging security features and potential vulnerabilities while the world was still quiet and peaceful. Now standing outside the breakfast room where he could hear Zoe and Theo chattering excitedly about their plans for the day, Mac felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But there was something else too, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since leaving the army. Protecting these children wasn't just a job. It was a mission that mattered in ways that went beyond paychecks and contracts. "Good morning, Mr. Mac," Theo called out as Mac entered the breakfast room. The boy was dressed in casual clothes but still maintained the impeccable manners that spoke of careful upbringing. "Zoe was telling me about the time you taught her to fish, and I was wondering if maybe we could try that sometime. I've never been fishing before." Zoe looked up from her plate of pancake syrup decorating the corners of her mouth in a way that made Mac's heart clench with familiar love. "Daddy's the best fisher in the whole world. He taught me how to be really quiet so the fish don't get scared, and how to be patient even when nothing happens for a long time. Fishing requires a lot of the same skills as being a good soldier," Mac said, settling into his chair and accepting a cup of coffee from Maria. "Patience, observation, understanding your environment. Maybe we can give it a try this weekend, if your grandmother thinks it's safe." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, dressed in a crisp business suit that suggested she had meetings planned for the day. "I think fishing sounds like an excellent idea. There's a small lake on the property that's been stocked with bass and trout. Theodore's mother used to fish there when she was his age." The brief shadow that passed over Eleanor's face reminded Mac that this family had already suffered losses, Theo's parents both gone, leaving the boy in his grandmother's care, and making him even more precious to her. It also made him a more vulnerable target for anyone seeking to exploit that emotional connection. "Mrs. Whitfield," Mac said carefully, "I was hoping to discuss the security arrangements for today. Anna mentioned tutoring sessions and meetings." Eleanor poured herself coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been managing complex schedules for decades. "Mrs. Chen will arrive at 9:30 for lessons with Theodore. I thought Zoe might enjoy joining them. Mrs. Chen is wonderful with children and has experience adapting her teaching methods to different ages and learning styles." Zoe's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that came from a child who genuinely loved learning. "Really, I could learn with Theo." "Of course, sweetheart," Eleanor said warmly. "Education is one of the most important gifts we can give children, and I suspect you'll keep Theodore on his toes intellectually." Mac found himself smiling at the interplay between the children and Eleanor. Despite her wealth and formal manner, she had a genuine warmth with kids that reminded him of his own grandmother, a woman who had made him feel special and valued even when money was tight and life was uncertain. Anna Delgado appeared in the breakfast room doorway, her expression carrying the kind of focused intensity that Mac recognized from mission briefings. "Mrs. Whitfield, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The slight tension in Anna's voice made Mac immediately alert. Eleanor excused herself, and Mac watched through the breakfast room's large windows as the two women walked across the terrace, their conversation clearly serious, despite their casual postures. "Is everything okay?" Theo asked, his young face showing the kind of worry that came from a child who had learned too early that adult conversations sometimes meant danger. "I'm sure it's just boring grown-up business," Mac said, though his own instincts were telling him otherwise. "Why don't you two finish your breakfast and get ready for your lessons? I'll check with Mrs. Chen about what subjects you'll be covering today." Through the window, Mac could see Anna speaking rapidly, while Eleanor's expression grew increasingly grave. Whatever news Anna was sharing, it wasn't good. Eleanor returned to the breakfast room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Children, why don't you go get ready for your tutoring session? Mrs. Chen will be here soon, and I know she's excited to meet you, Zoe." As the children hurried upstairs, chattering about what they might learn together, Eleanor's smile faded completely. "What's the situation?" Mac asked. "Pierce Langley didn't come home last night," Eleanor said quietly. "His wife called Anna this morning worried sick. He left the office yesterday evening after our dinner here, but he never arrived home. His car was found abandoned at a rest stop on I-87 Keys, still in the ignition, no sign of struggle or foul play." Mac felt his tactical mind immediately begin analyzing the implications. Either he ran because he's guilty and knows we're onto him, or someone took him because they think he's a liability. "Exactly," Anna said, joining them in the breakfast room. "His disappearance could mean he's the traitor who orchestrated yesterday's kidnapping attempt. Or it could mean he's the next victim of whoever is behind this conspiracy." Eleanor moved to the window, her gaze fixed on the Hudson River Valley, as if the familiar view could provide answers to impossible questions. "Pierce has been part of our family for 8 years. His wife Sarah is one of my closest friends. His children attend school with some of Theodore's classmates. If he's betrayed us..." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Mac understood that betrayal. He'd seen it in Afghanistan, when local allies turned against American forces, when people you'd trusted with your life proved to be working for the enemy. The tactical implications were serious, but the emotional damage was often worse. "We need to assume the worst-case scenario," Mac said. "If Pierce is working with hostile actors, he has detailed knowledge of this property's security systems, Theodore's routines, and your family's vulnerabilities. If he's been taken by those same actors, they might torture him for that information." Anna nodded grimly. "I've already initiated Security Protocol 7 random schedule changes, additional personnel, and restricted access to sensitive areas of the property. But we're essentially operating blind until we know whether Pierce is friend or enemy." The sound of children's voices drifted down from upstairs, Zoe and Theo getting ready for their day with the kind of innocent excitement that made the adult conversation feel surreal. Mac found himself thinking about the delicate balance between keeping children safe and allowing them to remain children. "What about the tutoring session? Mrs. Chen is one of our most trusted employees," Eleanor said. "She's been with the family for 12 years, and her background has been thoroughly vetted multiple times. The lessons will take place in the morning room on the 2nd floor, good sight lines, limited access points, and Anna's team can maintain overwatch without being obvious about it." Mac appreciated Eleanor's understanding of operational security, but he also recognized that they were essentially turning Whitfield Point into a fortress while trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy for the children. "I want to be present during the tutoring session," Mac said, "not interfering with the lessons but close enough to respond if there's a problem." "Agreed," Anna replied. "And this afternoon's security meeting has been moved to 1400 hours. We need to reassess our threat matrix and develop contingency plans based on Pierce's disappearance." Mrs. Chen arrived precisely at 9:30, an elegant woman in her 50s with the kind of quiet confidence that came from decades of working with children from wealthy families. Mac watched her interactions with both Theo and Zoe, noting how quickly she adapted her teaching style to accommodate Zoe's different educational background while keeping both children engaged and challenged. The morning room had been transformed into an impromptu classroom with comfortable seating arranged around a low table covered with books, maps, and art supplies. Mrs. Chen had planned lessons that combined history, geography, and creative expression, exactly the kind of interdisciplinary approach that would keep young minds active and engaged. Today, we're going to learn about brave explorers throughout history, Mrs. Chen announced, spreading out a large world map. People who went to places no one had been before, who faced dangers and uncertainties, but who kept going because they believed in their missions. Zoe's hand shot up immediately. Like Daddy when he was a soldier, he went to places that were dangerous to help people. Mac felt his chest tighten at his daughter's proud declaration. Through the morning room's windows, he could see Anna's security team maintaining discreet positions around the property, and the contrast between their hidden vigilance and the children's innocent enthusiasm struck him powerfully. Soldiers can definitely be explorers, Mrs. Chen agreed warmly. They explore new territories, they have to be brave in the face of uncertainty, and they're often trying to help people they've never met. Theodore, can you think of other kinds of explorers? Theo considered the question with the seriousness that seemed to characterize his approach to learning. What about people who explore ideas, like scientists who try to figure out how things work, or inventors who create new machines? Mac found himself genuinely impressed by the boy's thoughtfulness. At 7 years old, Theo was already displaying the kind of intellectual curiosity that suggested he might grow up to be worthy of the Whitfield legacy if he lived long enough to inherit it. The lesson continued with Mrs. Chen guiding the children through stories of famous explorers from Lewis and Clark to Marie Curie to modern astronauts. Both kids were completely absorbed, asking questions and making connections that demonstrated real engagement with the material. But Mac's attention was divided between the classroom activities and the larger security picture. Through the windows, he could see groundskeepers who moved with the awareness of trained security personnel and delivery trucks that were being inspected far more thoroughly than normal packages would require. Whitfield Point was quietly transforming into a compound under siege. During a break in the lessons while the children worked on drawing maps of imaginary expeditions, Mrs. Chen approached Mac. Mr. Ellis, I wanted to tell you how wonderful it is to see Theodore so engaged today. Having Zoe here has brought out a side of him that we don't often see during his individual lessons. He's more confident, more willing to share his ideas. Mac glanced at the two children, heads bent together over their drawings, collaborating on what appeared to be a treasure map, complete with dangerous mountains and friendly dragons. Zoe's always been good at making friends. She has her mother's gift for bringing out the best in people. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Theodore has had such a difficult time with friendships. The children at his boarding school, well, they come from similar backgrounds, but that doesn't always translate to genuine connection. There's something special about the bond he's formed with Zoe. Mac understood what she meant. Wealth and privilege could create barriers to authentic relationships, especially for children who were often viewed as prizes to be won or connections to be cultivated, rather than simply as kids who wanted to play and learn and be accepted for who they were. The morning session concluded with both children proudly presenting their exploration maps to Mac and Mrs. Chen. Zoe had created an elaborate adventure featuring brave knights and clever princesses working together to find a magical library, while Theo had designed an expedition to discover new forms of sustainable energy that could help protect the environment. "These are incredible," Mac said, examining both drawings with the serious attention that children's creative work deserved. "I can see you both put a lot of thought into your expeditions." As Mrs. Chen packed up her teaching materials, she mentioned that she would return the following week for regular sessions if the current arrangement continued to work well for both children. The casualness of her comment made Mac realize that everyone at Whitfield Point was operating under the assumption that this security crisis would be resolved quickly and efficiently. Mac hoped they were right, but his military experience had taught him that enemies who were sophisticated enough to orchestrate coordinated kidnapping attempts rarely gave up after a single failure. Lunch was served on the terrace overlooking the Hudson River, with both children chattering excitedly about their morning lessons and making plans for their afternoon activities. Eleanor joined them, bringing news that Pierce Langley's disappearance was being treated as a potential kidnapping by local law enforcement. His car showed no signs of struggle, Eleanor explained to Mac while the children were distracted by a family of deer grazing on the distant lawn. But there were security camera images from the rest stop showing him speaking with someone in another vehicle before apparently leaving voluntarily. Mac felt his eyebrows rise. Voluntarily? That changes things significantly. It could mean he left willingly because he's part of the conspiracy, Anna said, joining them on the terrace. Or it could mean he was coerced by someone he trusted, or someone who convinced him they had information about the threats against Theodore. Eleanor's expression was troubled in a way that went beyond professional concern. Pierce's wife received a call this morning from someone claiming to represent a private security firm. They told her that Pierce was safe but was working on a classified matter related to corporate security and wouldn't be able to contact her for several days. Mac's tactical instincts immediately flagged this development as suspicious. Did she believe it? She's confused and frightened, but the caller knew enough details about Pierce's work and our family situation to sound legitimate. They even referenced yesterday's incident at the library, claiming that Pierce was helping coordinate an expanded security review. Anna pulled out her phone, showing Mac a photograph of a middle-aged woman with worried eyes. Sarah Langley, mother of 2 elementary school teacher, no involvement in Whitfield Industries business. If Pierce is innocent and has been taken, she's a potential target for additional pressure tactics. If he's guilty, she might be a resource for information about his activities and contacts. Mac studied the photograph, thinking about the interconnected webs of relationships that both protected and endangered people in situations like this. What's your assessment of her trustworthiness? Clean background, no financial irregularities, genuine emotional response to her husband's disappearance, Anna replied. But if Pierce has been lying to her about his activities, she might not be aware of information that could be crucial to our investigation. Eleanor stood and moved to the terrace railing, her gaze fixed on the river valley below. I keep thinking about the children who will be affected by this situation. Pierce and Sarah's kids wondering why their father disappeared. Theodore trying to understand why his normal life has been turned upside down. Even Zoe, who's been drawn into danger through no fault of her own. Mac followed her gaze toward where Zoe and Theo had moved to a grassy area near the garden, playing some kind of elaborate game that involved a lot of running and laughing. Their joy was infectious and heartbreaking, at the same time a reminder of what was at stake beyond corporate security and financial interests. Mrs. Whitfield, Mac said carefully, I need to ask you something directly. Is there any possibility that the threats against your family are related to specific business decisions or government contracts that might have created powerful enemies? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the terrace railing with enough force to whiten her knuckles. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had made difficult decisions with far-reaching consequences. Whitfield Industries holds transportation contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and several allied nations. We're involved in infrastructure projects that affect energy security, supply chain resilience, and border protection. Any number of our business relationships could have created adversaries who view attacking my family as a way to influence corporate decisions. Anna turned from her surveillance of the grounds to face them directly. 3 months ago, Mrs. Whitfield made the decision to terminate a major contract with a consortium that included several companies with questionable ties to foreign governments. The financial impact was significant both for us and for them. Mac felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. How significant? $200 million over 5 years, Eleanor said quietly. And the consortium didn't take the termination well. There were legal challenges, political pressure, and what might charitably be called aggressive negotiation tactics. This was the kind of information that changed everything about the threat assessment. Mac's military experience had taught him that enemies with resources measured in hundreds of millions of dollars didn't limit themselves to simple kidnapping attempts. They planned complex, long-term operations with multiple contingencies and the willingness to escalate to whatever level of violence was necessary to achieve their objectives. "Why didn't you mention this connection earlier?" Eleanor's expression was pained but honest. "Because I hoped it wasn't connected. Because I wanted to believe that my business decisions wouldn't put Theodore at risk. Because admitting the connection means accepting that my choices may have made my grandson a target." Mac understood the guilt and self-doubt in her voice. He'd felt the same emotions when his military decisions had put soldiers under his command in danger, when tactical choices had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate mission parameters. "Mrs. Whitfield, if we're going to protect Theodore effectively, I need to understand the full scope of what we're facing. Who specifically was involved in this consortium? What kind of resources do they have? What are their likely next moves?" Anna consulted her tablet, pulling up files that had clearly been prepared for exactly this conversation. The consortium was led by Meridian Global Solutions, a private military contractor with operations in 37 countries. Their partners included Apex Logistics, Northern Infrastructure Group, and Blackwater International. All companies with significant financial resources and demonstrated willingness to use unconventional methods to protect their interests. Mac felt cold recognition wash over him. He'd encountered Meridian Global during his deployments in Afghanistan, and their reputation for ruthless efficiency was well established among military professionals. If they were behind the threats against the Whitfield family, then yesterday's library incident was just the opening move in a much larger campaign. "These aren't corporate competitors," Max said grimly. "These are professional military contractors with access to advanced technology, trained personnel, and operational experience in hostile AI environments. They're not going to give up after one failed kidnapping attempt." The implications hit Eleanor immediately. "You're saying Theodore is still in danger. Serious danger." "I'm saying Theodore is a target in an asymmetric warfare campaign being conducted by professionals who have both the resources and the expertise to sustain operations over an extended period. They'll adapt their tactics, they'll exploit our vulnerabilities, and they'll escalate the level of violence if necessary to achieve their objectives." Anna was already making calls implementing additional security protocols based on the elevated threat assessment. But Mac could see in her expression that she understood the same reality he was grappling with. Whitfield Point, for all its defensive advantages, was not designed to withstand a sustained assault by military professionals. Eleanor looked out at the children playing on the lawn, their innocent games a stark contrast to the adult conversation about warfare and violence. "What do you recommend?" Mac considered the options, none of them ideal. "Short term, we improve the defensive posture here while gathering more intelligence about Meridian Global's capabilities and intentions. Long term, we need to either neutralize the threat at its source or find a way to make continued operations against your family too costly for them to sustain. And Pierce's disappearance could be connected to Meridian Global, could be a separate issue, or could be a deliberate misdirection to confuse our threat assessment. Until we know more, we have to assume the worst-case scenario for every variable." The afternoon security meeting convened in Eleanor's study with an urgency that reflected the morning's revelations about Meridian Global's likely involvement. Anna had assembled a comprehensive briefing on the consortium's capabilities, recent operations, and known personnel, and the picture that emerged was sobering. Meridian Global employs approximately 1,200 personnel worldwide. Anna reported displaying organizational charts and operational maps on a large screen. Their leadership includes former special operations officers from multiple countries, and they have access to military-grade equipment through legal and quasi-legal channels. Mac studied the personnel files, recognizing some names and faces from his own military service. I've worked with some of these people. They're competent, professional, and absolutely ruthless when pursuing objectives. If they've decided that targeting Theodore is the most efficient way to pressure Mrs. Whitfield, they'll continue operations until they succeed or until the costs become prohibitive. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of responsibility clear in her posture. What kind of costs are we talking about? Financial costs, operational costs, and human costs, Mac replied. They need to believe that continued operations against your family will result in significant losses for their organization, personnel, equipment, reputation, and ultimately profit margins. Anna pulled up satellite imagery of the Whitfield Point property, highlighting defensive positions and potential vulnerability points. Our current security posture is designed to deter opportunistic threats and provide early warning of coordinated attacks. Against military professionals with advanced planning and equipment, we need to assume they can penetrate our perimeter if they're willing to accept casualties. Mac walked to the window overlooking the grounds where Zoe and Theo were visible in the distance, still playing their elaborate games under Maria's watchful supervision. The contrast between their innocent joy and the tactical discussion about military assault scenarios made his chest tight with protective rage. Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to understand that if Meridian Global is behind this threat, protecting Theodore isn't just about preventing kidnapping. It's about preparing for escalating levels of violence that could include direct assault on this property. Eleanor's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. What do you need from me? Complete authority to implement whatever security measures I deem necessary, regardless of cost or inconvenience. Access to all information about your business relationships that might affect threat assessment. And most importantly, your commitment to following security protocols, even when they disrupt normal family life. The study fell quiet, except for the distant sound of children's laughter drifting through the windows. Eleanor stared out at the grounds where her grandson was playing, and Mac could see her weighing the impossible choice between Theodore's safety and his childhood happiness. You have whatever authority you need, she said finally. Theodore's life is worth more than my comfort or convenience. Anna immediately began coordinating with additional security contractors, upgrading surveillance systems, and establishing protocols for rapid evacuation if the estate came under direct attack. But Mac knew that defensive measures alone wouldn't be sufficient against an adversary like Meridian Global. We need intelligence, he told Eleanor. Information about their operational plans, their timeline, their intended methods. Purely defensive tactics will eventually fail against sustained professional assault. Eleanor nodded slowly. I have contacts in various government agencies who might be able to provide information about Meridian Global's current operations. Off-the-record inquiries that could give us advance warning of planned actions. As the afternoon meeting concluded with assignments for upgraded security protocols and intelligence gathering, Mac found himself thinking about the children upstairs, getting ready for dinner. Zoe would want to hear about his day, and he would need to find ways to explain their new circumstances without frightening her. Theo would sense the increased tension among the adults, and would need reassurance that he was safe and loved, despite the dangerous circumstances. The challenge of protecting children wasn't just tactical, it was emotional and psychological as well. Both kids needed to feel secure enough to continue growing and learning and forming the kind of friendship that could sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. That evening's dinner was quieter than the previous night, with Pierce's empty chair serving as a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. Both children seemed to sense the adult's tension, and their conversation was more subdued, despite Maria's efforts to maintain a cheerful atmosphere. "Daddy," Zoe said, as Mac tucked her into bed. "Are we going to stay here for a long time?" Mac smoothed her hair, considering how to answer honestly without frightening her. "We're going to stay here until we're sure that Theo is safe from the people who tried to hurt him. That might be a few weeks, or it might be longer. But no matter what happens, you and I are going to be together, and we're going to take care of each other the way we always have." Zoe nodded solemnly. "Theo's really scared, isn't he? Even though he tries to be brave." Mac's heart clenched at his daughter's perceptiveness. "Yes, sweetheart, he is scared. But having you here as his friend is helping him be braver than he could be alone. Like when you and Mommy used to tell me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Exactly like that, baby. You're being very brave by being such a good friend to Theo." As Mac left Zoe's room, he found Theo waiting in the hallway, clearly wanting to talk, but uncertain about approaching. Mac knelt down to the boy's level, recognizing the signs of a child, struggling with fears too large for his small shoulders to carry. "Hey, buddy, how are you doing with everything that's been happening?" Theo's lower lip trembled slightly before he got control of himself. "Mr. Mac, are the bad people going to come back? Are they going to try to hurt Nana or Maria or Zoe?" Mac chose his words carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate reassurance. "There might be more bad people who try to cause problems, Theo. But there are also a lot of good people working very hard to keep you and everyone you care about safe. My job is to make sure nothing bad happens to you or Zoe, and I'm very good at my job." The boy nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "What if something happens to you? What if the bad people hurt you while you're trying to protect us?" The question hit Mac like a physical blow, reminding him that children who had already lost their parents lived with fears that went far beyond their own safety. Theo wasn't just worried about being kidnapped. He was terrified of losing another adult who had become important to his sense of security. "Theo, listen to me very carefully. I've been a soldier for a long time, and I've faced dangerous people before. I know how to stay safe while protecting other people, and I have a lot of other good people helping me. But most importantly, I made a promise to your grandmother and to myself that I would keep you and Zoe safe, and I always keep my promises." Some of the tension in Theo's small face began to ease. Like the knights in the stories, they always keep their promises even when it's hard. Exactly like that. And just like in the best stories, good people working together are always stronger than bad people working alone. After ensuring both children were settled for the night, Mac found himself standing on his bedroom balcony, looking out over the Hudson River Valley, where lights from distant towns twinkled like earthbound stars. The peaceful view belied the tension that had become a constant presence at Whitfield Point, and Mac found himself wondering how long they could maintain the illusion of normalcy while preparing for what might become an extended siege. His phone buzzed with a text from Ana Delgado. "Intelligence update. Meridian Global Team spotted conducting surveillance of property perimeter. Recommend elevated alert status effective immediately." Mac immediately called Anna, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the children. "What kind of surveillance? How many personnel?" "Thermal imaging suggests 3 two-person teams positioned at strategic points around our perimeter. Professional deployment, advanced equipment, coordinated timing. They're gathering intelligence for a planned operation." Mac felt his combat instincts engage fully for the first time since leaving the military. "Timeline for probable action. Unknown, but surveillance typically precedes operational deployment by 24 to 72 hours. We need to assume they're planning something within the next 3 days. Looking out at the peaceful river valley, Mac realized that their brief period of relative security was ending. Whatever came next would test not only his tactical skills, but his ability to protect 2 children while maintaining their trust and preserving as much of their innocence as possible. The war for Theodore Whitfield's safety was about to begin in earnest, and Mac found himself thinking about the promises he'd made to Eleanor, to the children, and to himself. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not for abstract principles or political objectives, but for the simple right of children to grow up safe and loved and free from the kind of fear that could poison their entire lives. Whatever Meridian Global was planning, Mac would be ready. The question was whether being ready would be enough to protect everything and everyone that mattered most. The silence that followed Anna's intelligence update seemed to stretch endlessly as Mac processed the implications of professional surveillance teams positioning around Whitfield Point. 3 days maximum before they moved, probably less if they detected any changes in the estate's defensive posture. Mac closed his eyes and let his military training take over, compartmentalizing his emotions and focusing on the tactical realities of protecting 2 children against opponents who had every advantage except one. They didn't understand what it meant to fight for family. "Anna," Mac said quietly into his phone, "I need you to implement silent alarm protocols. No changes to routine activities, no visible increase in security presence, nothing that might accelerate their timeline. But I want every member of your team on high alert and ready for immediate action." "Already in motion," Anna replied, her voice carrying the calm efficiency of a professional who had anticipated this moment. "What about the children? Do we brief them on emergency procedures?" Mac looked toward the bedroom where Zoe was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about nights and adventures rather than the very real dangers that were closing in around them. "Not tonight. But first thing in the morning, we need to have age-appropriate conversations about staying close to trusted adults and following instructions immediately if something unusual happens." After ending the call, Mac found himself unable to sleep, despite the exhaustion that came from constant vigilance. Instead, he moved through the mansion's halls like a ghost, familiarizing himself with every possible route between the children's bedrooms and potential safe rooms or evacuation points. The grand staircases and elegant hallways that had seemed welcoming during daylight hours now felt exposed and vulnerable, offering too many angles for attack and too few defensive positions. Eleanor found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, standing by the window that overlooked the garden where Zoe and Theo had played so happily just hours earlier. She was dressed in a silk robe that spoke of wealth and refinement, but her face showed the strain of a grandmother who understood that her world was about to be tested in ways she'd never imagined. "I couldn't sleep either," she said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the window. When Theodore's mother was his age, she used to have nightmares after her father died. I would find her wandering the halls at all hours looking for something she couldn't name. I suppose I'm doing the same thing now. Max studied Eleanor's reflections in the dark window, seeing past the elegant exterior to the frightened grandmother beneath. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to know that what's coming will be unlike anything you've experienced before. These people don't operate by normal rules of engagement. They'll use any tactic they think will be effective, including psychological warfare designed to break down our decision-making capabilities." Eleanor wrapped her robe more tightly around herself, but her voice remained steady. "What kind of psychological warfare?" "False information designed to make us doubt each other's loyalty. Apparent threats against family members or staff to force us into tactical mistakes. Disinformation campaigns that make us question what we know about the enemy's capabilities or intentions." Mac turned away from the window to face her directly. The most important thing is that we maintain complete trust and communication within our inner circle. The moment we start doubting each other is the moment we become vulnerable to divide and conquer tactics. Eleanor nodded slowly, but Mac could see her processing the implications of what he'd said. You're thinking about Pierce's disappearance. Whether he's a traitor or a victim, his absence creates exactly the kind of doubt you're describing. Exactly. And tomorrow we need to make some hard decisions about operational security that could affect innocent people. Pierce's wife, his children, even staff members who might have inadvertently provided information that compromised our security. The weight of those decisions settled over both of them as they stood in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary details of domestic life that seemed surreal against the backdrop of impending violence. Eleanor moved to the coffee maker with the automatic movements of someone seeking comfort in routine. Would you like some coffee? I find that sleepless nights are more bearable with good coffee and honest conversation. Mac accepted the offered cup, gratefully appreciating both the warmth and the normalcy of the gesture. Mrs. Whitfield, I have to ask you something that might be painful. Is there any possibility that your decision to terminate the Meridian Global contract was influenced by information or advice from Pierce Langley? Eleanor's hand paused halfway to her mouth, the coffee cup suspended as she considered the implications of Mac's question. Pierce was involved in the financial analysis that led to that decision. He provided cost projections, risk assessments, and recommendations about alternative contractors. Did he advocate for or against terminating the contract? Eleanor set down her cup with shaking hands. He advocated strongly for termination. He argued that the consortium's ties to foreign governments created unacceptable security risks, and that continuing the relationship would eventually damage our standing with domestic government agencies. Mac felt pieces of the puzzle shifting into new configurations. If Pierce had pushed for termination while secretly working with Meridian Global, it suggested a sophisticated long-term strategy designed to create exactly the kind of crisis they were now facing. But if he was innocent, his advocacy for termination made him a logical target for retaliation. Did anyone else have access to Pierce's analysis and recommendations? Eleanor's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. The entire board of directors, senior staff members, key government liaisons, anyone who might have forwarded that information to interested parties outside our organization. The scope of potential security breaches was staggering. Mac realized they weren't just dealing with a single traitor or even a coordinated external attack. They were potentially facing a multi-layered conspiracy that could include anyone with access to Whitfield Industries' internal communications. Mrs. Whitfield, starting tomorrow, we need to assume that any information shared beyond our immediate circle will be compromised. That means operational details, security protocols, even the children's daily schedules need to be restricted to people we can absolutely trust. Eleanor straightened in her chair, and Mac could see her transitioning from frightened grandmother to corporate executive who had navigated complex business crises for decades. I'll have Anna conduct background reviews on all personnel with access to Theodore. Anyone whose loyalty is even questionable will be temporarily reassigned to duties that don't involve family security. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges ahead. Mac found himself thinking about Zoe's excited chatter, about her new friendship with Theo, and about how quickly innocent childhood joy could be shattered by adult conflicts and violence. Mrs. Whitfield, regardless of what happens in the next few days, I want you to know that Zoe has been happier here than I've seen her since her mother died. Having a friend like Theo experiencing the kind of security and opportunity that your family has provided, it's given her something precious. Eleanor's expression softened with genuine emotion. Theodore has been transformed by Zoe's friendship as well. For the first time since his parents died, he's acting like a normal little boy instead of a small adult carrying too much responsibility. Whatever else happens, those children have given each other a gift that no amount of money could buy. The sound of bare feet on the kitchen's tile floor interrupted their conversation, and both adults turned to see Theo standing in the doorway, his hair messed from sleep, and his expression troubled. "Nana, I heard voices, and I thought maybe something bad was happening again." Eleanor immediately moved to kneel beside her grandson, wrapping him in arms that offered both physical comfort and emotional security. "Nothing bad is happening right now, sweetheart. Mr. Mack and I were just talking about ways to keep everyone safe tomorrow." Theo looked between the two adults with the kind of perceptive intelligence that made Mac realize the boy understood far more about their situation than anyone had given him credit for. "The bad people are coming back, aren't they? That's why you're awake in the middle of the night, making plans." Mac exchanged a look with Eleanor, recognizing that Theo deserved honesty appropriate to his age and maturity level. "Theo, there might be more people who try to cause problems for your family. But there are also a lot of good people working to make sure nothing happens to you or anyone you care about. Sometimes good people have to stay awake late to make sure they're ready to protect the people they love." Theo nodded solemnly, then surprised both adults by moving to sit beside Mac at the kitchen counter. "Mr. Mac, when you were a soldier, were you ever really scared about protecting people?" The question hit Mac with unexpected emotional force, bringing back memories of young soldiers under his command who had looked to him for exactly the kind of reassurance Theo was seeking now. "Yes, buddy, I was scared sometimes. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you understand that something important is at risk, and you care enough about protecting it to feel afraid of failing." "But you didn't fail, did you? You kept the people safe who were depending on you." Mac felt the weight of every soldier he'd lost, every mission that hadn't gone according to plan, every decision that had carried life and death consequences for people who trusted his judgment. "I did my best to keep people safe, and most of the time that was enough. But the most important thing I learned is that good people working together are always stronger than bad people working alone." Theo seemed to find comfort in this explanation, and his expression grew more determined than frightened. "So if you and Nana and Anna and all the other good people work together, we'll be stronger than the bad people who want to hurt our family." "That's exactly right," Eleanor said firmly, though Mac could hear the slight tremor in her voice that spoke of fear held carefully in check. "And remember, sweetheart, you and Zoe are part of our team too. You help by being brave, by listening to instructions from trusted adults, and by taking care of each other." As Eleanor led Theo back to his bedroom, Mac found himself thinking about the boy's questions and the weight of responsibility that came with being the adult that children looked to for safety and reassurance. In a few hours, he would need to brief both kids on emergency procedures without terrifying them, maintain their trust while preparing them for potential violence, and somehow preserve their innocence while acknowledging the very real dangers they faced. The pre-dawn hours passed slowly as Mac continued his restless patrol of the mansion, checking sight lines from windows, memorizing the locations of potential weapons or improvised defensive tools, and mentally rehearsing response scenarios for different types of attack. By the time the sun began to rise over the Hudson River Valley, he had developed contingency plans for everything from coordinated assault to hostage situations to emergency evacuation under fire. Anna's morning briefing confirmed that the surveillance teams had maintained their positions throughout the night, suggesting that whatever operation Meridian Global was planning would likely commence within the next 24 hours. The professional patience they were displaying indicated careful preparation and confidence in their ultimate success. Intelligence suggests they're waiting for something, Anna reported as Mac and Eleanor met in the study before the children woke up. Additional personnel, specialized equipment, or possibly just the right moment when they think our guard is down. Mac studied the tactical maps Anna had prepared showing known and suspected enemy positions around the estate's perimeter. What about Pierce Langley? Any updates on his whereabouts or condition? Nothing definitive, but we intercepted communications suggesting that someone matching his description was seen at a private airfield in Albany yesterday evening. If it was Pierce, he either left voluntarily or was being transported under duress. Eleanor's expression was pained as she processed this information. If Pierce has been taken by these people, they'll torture him for information about our security protocols. Theodore's routines, even the layout of this house. Mac nodded grimly. Which means we have to assume that any security measures Pierce was aware of have been compromised. We need to implement entirely new protocols based on information that was never shared with him. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's voices in the hallway. Zoe and Theo, apparently already awake and planning their day with the kind of enthusiasm that only children could maintain in the face of uncertainty. We need to brief them, Max said quietly. Age-appropriate information about staying safe following instructions and recognizing when situations might be dangerous. Eleanor stood and moved toward the door, her posture reflecting the transition from worried grandmother to protective matriarch. I'll handle Theodore. He responds well to direct honesty combined with reassurance about our commitment to his safety. Mac appreciated Eleanor's understanding of her grandson's personality, but he was also aware that the next few hours would be crucial in preparing both children for whatever was coming without traumatizing them unnecessarily. Breakfast was served in the smaller dining room with both children chattering excitedly about their plans for another day of lessons with Mrs. Chen, an exploration of the mansion's many interesting corners. Mac found himself memorizing their animated faces, their easy laughter, their complete trust that the adults in their lefouses would keep them safe from any harm. Zoe, Theo, Eleanor said gently, setting down her coffee cup with deliberate care. We need to talk about some important safety rules that will help keep everyone in our family protected. Both children immediately grew serious, recognizing the tone of voice that adults used when discussing matters of real importance. Mac was struck by how quickly they could transition from childhood playfulness to mature attention when circumstances required it. Are the bad people coming back? Theo asked directly, his young face showing both fear and determination. There might be more people who try to cause problems, Eleanor confirmed. But we have excellent people protecting us, and we're going to teach you some special safety rules that will help keep everyone secure. Mac leaned forward, making sure both children were focused on his words. The most important rule is this: if any adult tells you to come with them immediately, you do it without asking questions. Even if you're in the middle of something fun, even if you don't understand why, you trust that the adult knows something important about keeping you safe. Zoe raised her small hand with the seriousness of a student asking an important question. What if we can't find you or Nana? What if we're with someone we don't know very well? Mac felt a surge of pride at his daughter's thoughtfulness. Good question, sweetheart. There are special people who work here whose job is to protect you and Theo. Anna will introduce you to them this morning, so you'll recognize their faces and know you can trust them even if you've never talked to them before. Eleanor pulled out a small device that looked like a combination whistle and emergency beacon. This is a special safety tool that makes a very loud sound if you press this button. If you ever feel scared or think something dangerous might be happening, You press the button and help will come immediately. Theo examined the device with the intense curiosity that characterized his approach to learning. What if we're not together when something scary happens? What if Zoe is in one place and I'm in another place? Mac had been dreading this question, knowing that the children's natural instinct would be to find each other in a crisis, potentially putting both of them at greater risk. Theo, that's the hardest rule of all, but it's the most important one. If something dangerous happens and you and Zoe aren't together, your job is to get yourself to safety first. Don't try to find each other. Don't try to help each other. Trust that the adults will make sure you're both safe, but focus on following the safety rules yourself. Both children looked troubled by this instruction, and Mac could see them processing the implications of being separated during an emergency. Their friendship had become so important to both of them that the idea of not helping each other contradicted every instinct they possessed. It's like in the airplane safety videos, Eleanor added gently. Parents have to put on their own oxygen masks before helping their children, because everyone is safer when each person takes care of themselves first and trusts others to do the same. This analogy seemed to help both children understand the logic behind the rule, though Mac could see they still didn't like the idea of being separated from each other during a crisis. Anna appeared in the dining room doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but her body language suggesting heightened alertness. Mrs. Whitfield, could I speak with you briefly about today's schedule? Mac recognized the coded language indicating an important security development. While Eleanor and Anna conferred in low voices near the window, he continued talking with the children about safety procedures, emergency signals, and the importance of trusting adult instructions even when they didn't understand the reasoning behind them. Mr. Mac, Zoe said quietly, moving to sit closer to him. I'm scared that something bad might happen to you while you're protecting us. The echo of Theo's concerns from the previous evening hit Mac with renewed emotional impact. Both children had already lost parents, and their fear of losing another protective adult was both understandable and heartbreaking. Sweetheart, remember what I told you about being a soldier? My job was to protect people and come home safely so I could take care of you. That's still my job, and I'm very good at it. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Theo nodded solemnly, then surprised Mac by reaching across the table to take Zoe's hand. We'll take care of each other too, won't we, Zoe? Like the knights in the stories who work together to defeat the dragons. Mac felt his chest tighten with emotion at the sight of the two children supporting each other with a maturity that far exceeded their years. Whatever else happened in the coming crisis, their friendship would be a source of strength that could help them survive even the worst circumstances. Eleanor returned to the table with Anna, both women's expressions reflecting elevated concern masked by determination to maintain normalcy for the children's sake. Change of plans for today, Eleanor announced with forced cheerfulness. Mrs. Chen won't be able to come for lessons, so we're going to have our learning time right here in the house. And this afternoon we're going to play some special games that will help us practice our safety rules. Mac caught Anna's eye and saw confirmation that the situation was accelerating faster than anticipated. Whatever intelligence they had received suggested that waiting until evening might not be an option. The next few hours passed in a strange suspension of normalcy, with both children absorbed in educational activities that had been carefully designed to keep them occupied and contained within the mansion's most secure areas. Mac found himself dividing his attention between supervising their lessons and coordinating with Anna's security team as they prepared for what appeared to be an imminent assault. By noon, thermal imaging confirmed that additional personnel had joined the surveillance teams around the estate's perimeter. Professional analysis of their equipment signatures suggested they were prepared for both prolonged siege and rapid assault scenarios. They're giving us a choice, Anna explained during a quick briefing in Eleanor's study. Surrender Theodore voluntarily, or face an escalating series of attacks designed to force our compliance. Mac studied the tactical displays showing enemy positions and likely assault routes. What kind of escalation timeline are we looking at? Intelligence suggests they'll start with psychological pressure demonstrations of force communications designed to convince us that resistance is futile. If that doesn't work, they'll move to limited physical attacks designed to test our defenses and resolve. If we continue to resist, they'll escalate to whatever level of violence is necessary to achieve their objectives. Eleanor's face was pale but determined as she processed the implications. They're betting that I'll choose Theodore's immediate safety over long-term resistance, that I'll hand him over rather than risk having him caught in the middle of armed conflict. Mac understood the terrible choice Eleanor was facing, and he respected her enough to be completely honest about the tactical realities they confronted. Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to understand that if we choose to resist, there's no guarantee we can protect everyone. Professional military contractors with adequate resources and personnel can eventually overcome any defensive position, especially one that's trying to protect non-combatants. Eleanor walked to the window overlooking the garden, where the children had played so happily just days earlier. But if I surrender Theodore to them, what guarantee do I have that they'll keep their word about his safety? What's to stop them from using him as leverage for additional demands? Anna consulted her intelligence files, her expression grim. Meridian Global's track record suggests they honor agreements when it's in their strategic interest to do so. But they also have a history of escalating demands once they achieve their initial objectives. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from somewhere in the mansion, a reminder of what was truly at stake in the adult conversations about tactics and consequences. Mac found himself thinking about the promises he'd made to both children and about the kind of man he wanted to be when they looked back on this crisis years later. There's a third option, Mac said quietly. We make resistance so costly for Meridian Global that they choose to abandon this operation rather than continue sustaining losses. Eleanor turned from the window, her expression showing both hope and skepticism. What kind of costs are you talking about? Personnel casualties, equipment losses, and most importantly, exposure that damages their reputation and threatens their other contracts. Professional military contractors depend on discretion and success. If we can make this operation public and costly, they'll have strong incentives to withdraw. Anna was already pulling up communications equipment and media contacts on her tablet. We could coordinate with law enforcement and federal agencies, turn this into a public relations disaster that forces them to withdraw, rather than risk congressional investigation and contract cancellations. Mac felt a surge of tactical optimism for the first time since learning about Meridian Global's involvement. The key is making them believe that continued operations will result in greater losses than they're willing to accept. We don't have to defeat them militarily, we just have to convince them that this isn't worth the cost. Eleanor's expression began to reflect determined hope rather than resignation to impossible choices. What do you need from me to make this strategy work? Complete commitment to the tactical plan even when it seems risky or counterintuitive. Trust in my judgment about when to escalate and when to de-escalate. And most importantly, that we can protect Theodore without surrendering him to people who view him as nothing more than a bargaining chip. The afternoon passed in intensive preparation for what everyone understood might be the decisive confrontation. Anna coordinated with federal law enforcement agencies who had been monitoring Meridian Global's activities, while Eleanor used her political connections to ensure that any violence at Whitfield Point would receive immediate media attention and congressional scrutiny. Mac focused on the tactical preparations that would give them the best chance of protecting the children while imposing unacceptable costs on any assault force. The mansion's defensive advantages were significant, but they would mean nothing if Meridian Global was willing to accept heavy casualties to achieve their objectives. As evening approached, both children seemed to sense the increased tension, despite everyone's efforts to maintain normal routines. Zoe stayed closer to Mac than usual, while Theo gravitated toward Eleanor with the kind of clingy behavior that suggested his anxiety was approaching overwhelming levels. "Daddy," Zoe whispered, as Mac helped her into her pajamas. "Are the bad people going to try to hurt us tonight?" Mac knelt down to meet her eyes, directly choosing honesty over false comfort. "They might try to cause trouble tonight, sweetheart. But remember all the safety rules we practiced today. Remember all the good people who are working to keep us safe. No matter what happens, you follow those rules and trust that the adults will take care of the dangerous stuff." Zoe nodded bravely, but Mac could see the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "Will you stay close to me? Will you make sure nothing happens to Theo?" "I'll be as close as I can be while doing my job to protect everyone. And if I have to go somewhere else for a little while, there will always be other trusted adults nearby to keep you and Theo safe." As Mac tucked Zoe into bed, he found himself making the kind of silent promises that parents and soldiers understood, vows to do whatever was necessary to protect innocence, even at the cost of their own safety or life. The mansion fell quiet as evening settled over the Hudson River Valley, but Mac knew the silence was deceptive. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the estate's perimeter, professional soldiers were making their final preparations for an operation that would determine whether Theodore Whitfield remained free or became a pawn in a larger game of power and profit. Mac took his position in the security center Anna had established in the mansion's basement, surrounded by monitors showing thermal imaging and motion detection from around the property. Every member of their small defensive team understood the stakes, and Mac could see in their faces the same grim determination he remembered from his own soldiers before difficult missions. "Contact in Sector 7, Anna reported quietly, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who had trained for exactly this moment. 4 personnel moving toward the north perimeter. Professional formation military equipment." Mac studied the thermal signatures on the display, recognizing movement patterns that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. "They're probing our response capabilities, testing whether we'll react to small-scale incursions or wait for a larger assault." Eleanor appeared in the security center doorway, dressed in dark clothing that suggested she had no intention of remaining safely hidden during the coming confrontation. "Status report. Initial contact," Mac replied without taking his eyes off the tactical displays. "They're following standard doctrine-limited probe to assess our defensive posture, followed by either negotiation or escalated assault, depending on our response. The next few hours would determine whether Mac's strategy of making resistance too costly could succeed or whether they would face the kind of prolonged siege that rarely ended well for defenders trying to protect non-combatants." But looking at Eleanor's determined face, thinking about the 2 children sleeping upstairs, who trusted him to keep them safe, Mac felt the familiar clarity that came with accepting a mission that mattered more than personal survival. Whatever Meridian Global had planned, they were about to discover that some people couldn't be bought intimidated or defeated when they were fighting for family. The tactical display showed the 4-person team holding position at the north perimeter, their thermal signatures indicating they were equipped with advanced surveillance equipment and maintaining professional spacing. Mac recognized the pattern. They weren't preparing for immediate assault, but rather establishing overwatch positions that would allow them to monitor the estate's response capabilities. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," Mac murmured to Anna, studying the enemy positions with the analytical detachment that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Classic psychological pressure tactic. They want us to reveal our defensive capabilities or make tactical errors based on anxiety and uncertainty. Anna's fingers flew over her keyboard as she coordinated with federal law enforcement agencies who were now mobilizing in response to Eleanor's earlier communications. FBI tactical teams are en route ETA 45 minutes. State police have established a perimeter 2 miles out. If Meridian Global wants to avoid a major federal incident, they need to complete their operation within the next half hour. Eleanor moved to stand behind Mac's chair, her presence both comforting and troubling, as he realized she had no intention of hiding in a secure room while her grandson's fate was being decided by others. What are our options if they escalate before federal support arrives? Mac's mind cycled through tactical scenarios with the cold precision of a chess master calculating multiple moves ahead. We have excellent defensive positions, limited personnel, and 2 non-combatants who represent both our primary objective and our greatest vulnerability. If they're willing to accept casualties, they can probably breach our perimeter. But if they're operating under rules of engagement that require discretion and minimal exposure, we can make any assault extremely costly. The radio crackled with Anna's calm voice coordinating defensive positions throughout the mansion. Mac found himself thinking about the children sleeping upstairs, trusting that the adults in their living would solve the dangerous problems while they dreamed of knights and dragons and adventures that always ended happily. Contact in Sector 3, one of Anna's team reported. Single individual approaching the main gate under a white flag. Appears to be requesting negotiation. Mac felt his tactical instincts sharpen as he recognized the classic opening move of professional military contractors. They're going to try to convince us that cooperation is in everyone's best interest. Probably offer guarantees about Theodore's safety in exchange for voluntary surrender. Eleanor's expression hardened with the kind of determination that had built a business empire from nothing. Let them talk, but make it clear that Theodore stays here under our protection, regardless of their threats or promises. Anna established communication with the individual at the main gate, patching the conversation through to the security center's speakers so everyone could monitor the negotiation in real time. "Good evening," came a cultured voice that carried the confidence of someone accustomed to having his words taken seriously. "My name is Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Army retired. I represent a private security consortium that has been contracted to ensure the safety of Theodore Whitfield during a period of elevated threat assessment." Mac recognized the sophisticated approach immediately, truth mixed with deception, legitimate credentials used to mask illegitimate objectives, reasonable-sounding justifications for unreasonable demands. Eleanor leaned toward the microphone with the poise of someone who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with equally sophisticated adversaries. "Colonel Webb, this is Eleanor Whitfield. Theodore is currently safe under the protection of qualified security personnel. If you have legitimate concerns about his welfare, I suggest you coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies rather than conducting unauthorized operations on private property." There was a pause before Webb responded, and Mac could almost hear the tactical assessment taking place as Meridian Global's field commander processed this unexpected resistance to what should have been a straightforward intimidation scenario. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand your concern for your grandson's immediate safety. However, our intelligence indicates that Theodore faces imminent threats from hostile actors who have already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. The safest course of action is temporary relocation to a secure facility until these threats can be neutralized." Anna was simultaneously tracking the conversation and monitoring tactical displays that showed additional enemy personnel moving into position around the estate's perimeter. Mac could see the classic pincer movement developing, negotiate from a position of apparent reasonableness, while deploying overwhelming force to make resistance seem futile. Colonel Webb. Mac interjected his voice, carrying the authority of someone who had faced down similar situations in actual combat zones. This is Marcus Ellis, former Captain, United States Army. I'm currently responsible for Theodore's security, and I can assure you that he's adequately protected. If you have intelligence about specific threats, I suggest you share that information with appropriate law enforcement agencies. The pause was longer this time, and Mac could sense Webb recalculating his approach based on the unexpected presence of military opposition. Captain Ellis, I'm familiar with your service record. Afghanistan. Multiple deployments, distinguished service record. I respect your capabilities, but you're facing a threat matrix that exceeds what any individual security specialist can handle effectively. Mac felt a cold smile cross his face as he recognized the attempt to flatter him into cooperation. Colonel, my threat assessment indicates that the most immediate danger to Theodore comes from unauthorized military contractors conducting operations without legal justification on American soil. That's a threat I'm well equipped to handle. Eleanor moved closer to the microphone, her voice carrying the steel of someone who had made difficult decisions under pressure for decades. Colonel Webb, you have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing your personnel from my property before I escalate this situation to federal authorities who take a very dim view of private military operations conducted without proper authorization. Anna held up her hand, indicating incoming communications from the federal agencies that had been monitoring the situation. Mac could see relief beginning to replace anxiety in her expression, as outside support materialized exactly when they needed it most. Colonel Webb, Anna announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning was paying off. FBI tactical teams are now entering the area with full authority to investigate and detain personnel conducting unauthorized military operations. Your window for voluntary withdrawal is closing rapidly. The tactical displays showed immediate changes in enemy positioning as Meridian Global's forces responded to the arrival of federal law enforcement. Professional discipline was evident in their coordinated withdrawal, but Mac could also sense the frustration of operatives who had expected a much simpler scenario. Mrs. Whitfield. Webb's voice carried resigned professionalism mixed with something that might have been respect. This matter is far from resolved. The threats against your family are real and persistent. You may have won this particular engagement, but the larger conflict will continue. Eleanor's response was immediate and uncompromising. Colonel Webb, any future threats against my family will be met with the full resources of law enforcement federal agencies and whatever additional measures prove necessary. I suggest you inform your employers that the Whitfield family is prepared for a prolonged conflict if that's what they choose. The radio fell silent as Webb's team completed their withdrawal, leaving Mac, Eleanor, and Anna staring at tactical displays that showed their perimeter finally clear of hostile personnel for the first time in days. But Mac's military experience had taught him that tactical victories were often followed by strategic complications, and he knew that Meridian Global's withdrawal was more likely a repositioning than a genuine defeat. This isn't over, he said quietly, voicing what everyone in the security center understood but hadn't yet acknowledged. They'll reassess, adapt their tactics, and try again with a different approach. Anna was already coordinating with federal agencies to establish a longer-term security presence around Whitfield Point. FBI is treating this as an ongoing domestic terrorism investigation. They're prepared to maintain surveillance and rapid response capabilities until the threat is neutralized at its source. Eleanor sank into a chair with the exhaustion of someone who had been operating on adrenaline and determination for hours. What does neutralizing the threat at its source actually mean? Mac considered the question with the strategic thinking that had made him effective in complex military operations. It means making Meridian Global's continued operations against your family more costly than abandoning their contract. That could involve exposing their illegal activities, targeting their other business relationships, or demonstrating that attacking the Whitfield family carries consequences that extend far beyond this single operation. The sound of bare feet on stairs interrupted their tactical discussion, and Mac looked up to see Zoe and Theo appearing in the security center doorway, both children still in their pajamas, but wide awake with the kind of alertness that came from sensing adult anxiety despite efforts to shield them from danger. "Daddy?" Zoe's voice was small and uncertain. "We heard voices and noises. Did something scary happen?" Mac immediately moved to kneel beside both children, recognizing that they deserved age-appropriate honesty about what had occurred. "Some people tried to cause trouble tonight, but all the good people working together made them go away. Everyone is safe and the police are here to make sure the troublemakers don't come back." Theo looked between the adults with the perceptive intelligence that consistently impressed Mac. "Are we going to have to keep having safety rules and staying close to trusted adults?" Eleanor joined Mac beside the children, her grandmother's instincts taking precedence over her role as corporate executive. "For a little while longer, sweetheart. But tonight showed us that when good people work together and refuse to give up, they're stronger than bad people who only care about money and power." Mac found himself thinking about the lesson both children had learned tonight, that adults could face serious dangers and still protect the people they loved, that working together made everyone stronger, and that standing up to bullies sometimes required courage, but was always worth the effort. "Mr. Mac," Theo said quietly, "when you were talking to that man on the radio, you sounded like the knights in our stories. Like someone who wouldn't let dragons hurt people, even if the dragons were really big and scary." The comparison made Mac's chest tight with emotion as he realized that both children had been listening to the adult conversations and processing what they heard through the lens of the stories that helped them understand concepts like courage, justice, and protecting others. "Sometimes, Theo, the most important battles are the ones we fight to protect people we care about. And sometimes the scariest dragons are the ones that look like ordinary people, but have hearts full of greed and selfishness." Zoe moved to sit on Mac's lap, seeking the physical comfort that helped children process frightening experiences. "But we won, didn't we? The good people won, and the bad people had to go away." Mac exchanged a look with Eleanor, both of them understanding that the children needed to believe in victory and justice, even when the adult reality was more complicated. "We won tonight, sweetheart. And every time good people work together and refuse to give up, we get a little stronger and a little better at protecting the things that matter most." Anna appeared in the doorway with coffee and hot chocolate, her timing perfect for transitioning from crisis management to recovery and reassurance. "I thought everyone might want something warm while we wait for the FBI to finish their initial investigation." As the children sipped hot chocolate and the adults managed the post-crisis coordination with federal agencies, Mac found himself reflecting on how quickly their lives had changed since that afternoon in the Millbrook Public Library. Zoe had found not just a friend, but a sense of belonging, in a world where she could learn and grow and dream bigger dreams than their small apartment had allowed. Theo had discovered that friendship could provide strength and courage even in the face of serious danger. Eleanor had learned that family bonds could extend beyond blood relationships to include people who proved their loyalty through actions rather than words. And Mac had rediscovered a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival or even providing for his daughter. He had found a mission that connected his military skills with his deepest values about protecting innocence and standing up to those who would exploit power for selfish ends. Over the following days, federal investigators worked to unravel the full scope of Meridian Global's operations against the Whitfield family. Pierce Langley was found alive but shaken at a private medical facility in Albany, where he had been held under sedation, while Meridian Global's operatives attempted to extract information about Whitfield Industries' security protocols and business relationships. Pierce's account of his ordeal revealed the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy against Eleanor's family. He'd been approached months earlier by individuals claiming to represent legitimate security consultants who were concerned about threats against Whitfield Industries' government contracts. Gradually, they had cultivated his trust and gathered intelligence about the family's routines, security arrangements, and business relationships. They were incredibly patient, Pierce explained during his debriefing with FBI investigators. They spent months building relationships, establishing credibility, and positioning themselves as allies who shared our concerns about corporate security threats. I never suspected that they were the actual source of the danger they claimed to be protecting us from. Mack found Pierce's experience both enlightening and troubling, as it revealed the extent to which Meridian Global was willing to invest time and resources in operations against civilian targets. This wasn't opportunistic crime or simple intimidation. It was sophisticated warfare conducted against American families by people who viewed violence as a business tool. Eleanor's response to the revelations about Pierce's ordeal was characteristically direct and decisive. Rather than simply implementing defensive measures to protect her family, she chose to take the fight directly to Meridian Global through legal, political, and financial channels that would make their business model unsustainable. They chose to make this personal when they targeted Theodore, Eleanor told Mack during one of their strategy sessions. Now they're going to discover that attacking a child brings consequences they never anticipated. Working with federal investigators and congressional allies, Eleanor launched a comprehensive campaign to expose Meridian Global's illegal activities and strip them of the government contracts that provided the majority of their revenue. Media coverage of the attempted kidnapping and the subsequent investigation generated exactly the kind of public scrutiny that professional military contractors depended on avoiding. Within weeks, Meridian Global found themselves facing congressional hearings, federal criminal investigations, and contract cancellations that effectively ended their operations as a legitimate business entity. The consortium that had hired them to pressure Eleanor Whitfield dissolved as its member companies distanced themselves from the scandal and legal liability. But for Mack, the most meaningful victories were the smaller, more personal ones that played out in the daily life of Whitfield Point as two children continued to grow and learn and support each other through the aftermath of their shared adventure. Zoe's confidence and curiosity flourished in an environment where learning was celebrated and friendship was valued more than material possessions. Her natural intelligence found outlets in advanced educational programs that challenged her intellectually, while allowing her to remain a normal child who loved stories about knights and dragons. Theo's resilience and courage became evident as he processed the trauma of being targeted for kidnapping while maintaining his fundamental trust in the adults who had protected him. His friendship with Zoe provided a foundation of normalcy that helped him understand that not all changes in life were threatening, and that sometimes new people could become family through shared experiences and mutual support. Eleanor discovered that opening her home and heart to Mack and Zoe had given her something precious that wealth alone could never provide: a sense of family connection that went beyond blood relationships to encompass the deeper bonds created by shared values and mutual sacrifice. And Mack found himself thinking about Sarah's dreams for Zoe's future, recognizing that his daughter was growing up with opportunities and security that exceeded anything he could have provided alone. More importantly, she was learning lessons about courage, loyalty, and standing up for others that would serve her throughout her life. The fishing trip Mack had promised became a reality on a sunny Saturday morning when the FBI declared the immediate threat neutralized and life at Whitfield Point could return to something approaching normalcy. Eleanor joined them at the small lake on the estate grounds, armed with fishing gear and a picnic lunch that Maria had prepared with her usual attention to detail. "Mr. Mack," Theo said, as he cast his line with the careful technique Mack had taught him. "Do you think we'll always be friends, even when we grow up and live in different places?" Mack looked at the two children sitting side by side on the dock, their fishing lines disappearing into the calm water, while they chatted about everything from school to books to their dreams for the future. "Theo, some friendships are special enough to last a lifetime. The kind of friendship you and Zoe have built on trust and courage and caring about each other's happiness, that's the kind that only gets stronger as you get older." Zoe nodded seriously, her attention divided between her fishing line and the conversation. "Besides, we're not going anywhere. Daddy says we're staying here as long as Mrs. Eleanor wants us, and I think she likes having us around." Eleanor's smile was radiant as she listened to the children's easy assumption that their new family arrangement was permanent. "I more than like having you around, sweetheart. You and your father have given me something I didn't even know I was missing, a sense that this big house is truly a home filled with laughter and love and people who care about each other." As the afternoon wore on and the children's excitement about fishing gave way to comfortable drowsiness in the warm sunshine, Mac found himself thinking about the unexpected turns life could take. A single moment of recognizing danger in a public library had led to profound changes for everyone involved, changes that went far beyond the immediate crisis they had faced together. Zoe had found not just friendship, but a sense of belonging in a world where her intelligence and curiosity were celebrated and nurtured. Theo had discovered that trust and courage could overcome even the most frightening circumstances when good people worked together. Eleanor had learned that family could expand to include people who proved their loyalty through actions rather than blood relationships. And Mac had rediscovered that his military training and protective instincts could serve purposes that went far beyond combat operations. They could create safety and security for people he had come to love as deeply as his own daughter. That evening, as they prepared for what had become their traditional family dinner in the small dining room, Eleanor made an announcement that surprised no one but moved everyone. "I've been thinking about making some changes to Theodore's education arrangements," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had found the perfect solution to a complex problem. "Rather than splitting his time between boarding school and homeschooling, I'd like to establish a small private school here on the estate grounds. Mrs. Chen would serve as head teacher, and we'd bring in additional educators to create a program that could serve both Theodore and Zoe, as well as any other children whose families value the kind of educational environment we've created here." Zoe's eyes lit up with excitement at the prospect of continuing her education alongside her best friend. "Really? We could go to school together every day and still live here and have adventures and learn about everything." Theodore was practically bouncing in his chair as he processed the implications of Eleanor's announcement. "And we could have other kids to play with and learn with, but we'd still be best friends and still be safe here with everyone we love." Mac felt his heart swell with gratitude for Eleanor's generosity and wisdom in creating a solution that honored both children's needs for normalcy and security. "Mrs. Whitfield, that's an incredibly generous offer. Are you sure you want to take on the complexity of establishing a school?" Eleanor's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had built a business empire by recognizing opportunities and having the courage to pursue them. "Mac, I've established transportation networks across multiple continents. Creating a small school for extraordinary children seems like a much more enjoyable challenge." Anna, who had joined them for dinner, as had become her custom, raised her wineglass in a toast. "To the Whitfield Academy for Exceptional Young People, May it produce graduates who understand that courage, intelligence, and compassion are the most important subjects anyone can master. As the adults toasted the new school and the children chattered excitedly about their educational future, Mac found himself thinking about the promises he had made during the crisis that had brought them all together. He had promised Eleanor that he would protect Theodore, and he had kept that promise. He had promised both children that good people working together were stronger than bad people working alone, and recent events had proven that promise true. But most importantly, he had made silent promises to himself about the kind of man he wanted to be and the kind of life he wanted to create for Zoe. Those promises had led him to choices that had changed everything for the better. Later that evening, as Mac tucked Zoe into bed, in what had become her permanent bedroom at Whitfield Point, she asked the question that had been forming in her young mind as she processed all the changes in their lives. "Daddy, are we happy here? I mean really happy, not just safe and comfortable, but actually happy." Mac sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair with the gentle touch that had comforted her through every difficult moment since her mother's death. "Sweetheart, I haven't seen you this happy since before Mommy got sick. You have a best friend who adores you. You're learning new things every day, and you're living in a place where you're valued and cherished for exactly who you are." Zoe was quiet for a moment, her 6-year-old mind processing complex emotions with the seriousness that had always impressed him. "But what about you, Daddy? Are you happy here too?" The question hit Mac with unexpected emotional force as he realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he could honestly answer yes to that question. "Yes, baby, I'm happy here too. Not just because you're happy, although that's the most important thing to me, but because I feel like I'm doing work that matters surrounded by people who have become our family in a place where we both belong." Zoe smiled with the kind of pure contentment that only children could achieve when they felt completely secure and loved. "Then we're home, aren't we? Really home, not just staying somewhere temporarily." Mac leaned down to kiss her forehead, his heart full of gratitude for the little girl who had taught him that home wasn't a place but a feeling of belonging with people who loved you unconditionally. "Yes, sweetheart, we're home." 6 months later, the Whitfield Academy for Exceptional Young People opened its doors to 12 students whose families valued educational excellence, combined with character development and real-world application of learning. Zoe and Theodore were joined by children from diplomatic families, military personnel, and other families who understood that the best education combined intellectual challenge with emotional support and practical wisdom. Mac found himself serving not only as head of security for the school, but also as an instructor in what Eleanor had diplomatically termed leadership development classes that taught young people about courage, decision-making under pressure, and the importance of standing up for others who couldn't protect themselves. The curriculum Mrs. Chen developed emphasized critical thinking, creative problem-solving, and collaborative learning, but it also included practical skills like conflict resolution, emergency preparedness, and the kind of situational awareness that had served Mac so well during his military service. Most importantly, the school fostered an environment where children learned that their individual talents and abilities were most valuable when used in service of others, and that true strength came from working together rather than competing against each other. On a warm spring afternoon, Mac watched from his office window as Zoe and Theodore led a group of their classmates in what appeared to be an elaborate outdoor science experiment involving model rockets and trajectory calculations. Their easy leadership and genuine friendship had made them natural centers of their small academic community, and Mac felt pride that went beyond simple parental satisfaction. These children were learning lessons about courage, loyalty, and service that would shape them into the kind of adults the world needed more of. They were discovering that intellectual achievement was most meaningful when combined with emotional intelligence and moral courage. Eleanor appeared in his office doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that had become her natural expression since Whitfield Point had transformed from a lonely mansion into a bustling home filled with children's voices and learning opportunities. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, with the comfort of someone who had become genuine family rather than simply an employer. Mac accepted the coffee gratefully, his attention still focused on the children outside who were celebrating what appeared to be a successful rocket launch. "I was thinking about promises," he said quietly. "The ones we make to children, the ones we make to ourselves, and the ones that life makes to us when we have the courage to embrace unexpected opportunities." Eleanor followed his gaze toward the children, her expression reflecting the same mixture of pride and protective love that Mac felt when he watched Zoe navigate her world with increasing confidence and joy. "You know," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "when I first asked you to stay and protect Theodore, I thought I was hiring a bodyguard. I never imagined I was gaining a son and a granddaughter who would teach an old woman that family isn't defined by blood relationships, but by the willingness to love and protect each other unconditionally." Mac felt his throat tighten with emotion as he processed Eleanor's words and the depth of affection they represented. "Mrs. Whitfield," "Eleanor," she corrected gently. "Family members don't need to be quite so formal with each other." Mac smiled, recognizing the significance of the correction and what it represented about how their relationship had evolved from professional necessity to genuine family bonds. "Eleanor, when I carried Zoe out of that courthouse 6 months ago, I thought I was just trying to keep her safe until we could go back to our normal life. I never imagined that normal was actually limiting both of us, or that taking a risk on something completely new would give us everything we never knew we were missing." Outside, the children had moved on from rockets to what appeared to be an impromptu game of capture the flag, with Zoe and Theodore working together to coordinate strategy, while their classmates divided into competing teams. Their leadership was natural and unforced, based on trust and friendship, rather than authority or competition. "They're going to change the world, aren't they?" Eleanor said, watching the children with the kind of long-term perspective that came from decades of building institutions and influencing outcomes. Not through money or power, but through the kind of character and wisdom they're developing here. Mac nodded, thinking about the lessons both children had learned through their shared adventure and the ongoing education that was shaping them into young people who understood that strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them. "They're going to make it a better world," he agreed. "And they're going to do it together the way they've done everything else since the day they met." As evening approached and the children finished their outdoor activities, Mac found himself thinking about the bedtime stories he would tell Zoe that night. Stories about brave knights and clever princesses who worked together to protect their kingdoms from dragons and villains who threatened innocent people. But tonight's stories would be different, because they would be true stories about real courage and authentic friendship and the way ordinary people could become heroes when they chose to stand up for what was right. And Zoe would fall asleep knowing that she was living in her own fairy tale, one where the good people really did win when they worked together, where friendship was the most powerful magic of all, and where home was wherever the people who loved you were gathered together. Max smiled as he prepared to end another day at Whitfield Point, surrounded by family he had chosen, and been chosen by doing work that mattered in ways that went far beyond paychecks or professional advancement. He was exactly where he belonged, protecting and nurturing the people who had become his whole world. Some fairy tales, Mac reflected, as he headed toward the sound of children's laughter, and Eleanor's voice calling everyone to dinner, were worth believing in because they were actually true.